Hope everyone's doing well today. Today is what is it? Thursday, March 16th, 2023. Um, we have some stuff to talk about. Missed some stuff last or I missed streaming that last week, so we might be covering some stuff that's a little bit older. Um, some of it was a little bit harder to find, but we still will be discussing that. So, um, mostly me talking about like a lot of the insane shit that's been going on in like America right now in the forms of like fucking 400 anti-LGBTQ bills being passed, um, as well as like you know the fucking federal government actually deciding to do something, which is surprising. And then the Silicon Valley Bank shit and some of the election stuff from CSIS and all that stuff. So I guess we'll start off with some of the absolute insanity that's been going on in the States when it comes to, like, say, gender affirming care and whatnot. So I guess we'll
Pro-choice
hop into
demonstrators
it.
gathered outside a federal courthouse in Texas. Inside, a judge heard arguments in a case that could ban a popular abortion pill.
There's no person in America who is untouched by this case, no matter what your feelings about abortion.
It all centers around a drug called mifepristone, used across the U.S. since its federal approval in 2000. Last November, a coalition of anti-abortion groups filed a lawsuit, hoping to see that approval reversed. They argue the Food and Drug Administration did not adequately consider the drug's safety. The FDA says it can.
So, like, to my knowledge, this is just a bunch of bullshit, right? It's completely ridiculous that they would do this, but it's not unsurprising that this would happen. Um, because they're like the Republicans in America are literally like attacking pretty much everything. Threatening LGBTQ members, uh, and like wanting to erase them out of existence in America. I believe there's like a total of at least 400 bills that have been proposed or have passed. So, that's fucking insane. um, they clearly won their fucking abortion battle, but realistically they didn't because, you know, if someone wants to get an abortion, they're going to be getting an abortion. It'll just be back alley and increase maternal morality or mortality, sorry. So, it really didn't change anything. And like the thing is that we share like here in Canada we share a very similar culture to what America does or has, right? Because we're fucking Ameriboos. And a lot of the shit that's popping off now, say like the attack on abortion, like abortion bans and whatever, and then the attack of the LGBTQ and whatever. All that shit's gonna be popping off here within a couple years. The funny thing is that to my knowledge, I actually think that the like the whole abortion stuff is actually protected by federal law, so there's that. But we have our own thing going on with abortions right now. Places or provinces are starting to move like some public funds from abortion clinics to private abortion clinics, which is going to be, well, it's going to increase the amount of people dying. That's all I'll say.
Conducted a comprehensive review, and mifepristone is safe and effective to use. More than half of all abortions in the United States are medical abortions, and they typically require the use of mifepristone in conjunction with another drug.
It would be unprecedented for a judge, a single judge, to say the FDA got it wrong 23 years ago. There's never been an instance where anyone has overturned the ruling of the FDA against the FDA's wishes.
Matthew Kaczmarek is the judge presiding over the case. He's a conservative and was appointed by former President
surprising.
Donald Trump, stoking fears among pro-choice advocates that he will move to restrict abortion access.
This abortion pill is the gold standard. This will have huge impacts in the United States and have reverberations across the world.
Even if Kaczmarek rules with the plaintiffs, it's still not clear what will come next.
The FDA could start a process of withdrawing mifepristone, or the FDA could seek to reapprove it.
With Roe v. Wade overturned just last summer, some experts say this is likely just the beginning of many fights over abortion rights in the United States. Idil Musa, CBC News, Toronto.
So yeah, you know, it's not fucking surprising that yeah, that's gonna be fun.
In Texas, a judge heard arguments today in a case about whether a commonly used abortion pill should be sold in the U.S. And depending on his ruling, access to the medication could be curtailed across the country. A conservative group argued the safety of the abortion pill was never properly studied, even though it's been approved for use for 20 years. Our Washington Bureau Chief Jackson Prosco is watching the case. Jackson.
Donna, this case has potentially wide-ranging implications for abortion access across the U.S., even in states where abortion is still fully legal. A conservative Christian group in Texas asked a judge to order the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to pull the abortion drug mifepristone off the market. That's significant because...
Like, here's the thing, right? They're only trying to restrict access to, you know, abortion medication and procedures, even more than what they currently are already experiencing in Texas. And it's just going to lead to increased medical tourism for abortion care. Like, it's not going to actually stop anything, right? It is completely ridiculous that this is happening. And, you know, it's just going to make fucking things, like, even worse than what it is.
Medical abortions using drugs, not surgery, make up about half of pregnancy terminations in the U.S. The group behind the lawsuit argued the drug should never have been approved, claiming it didn't go through proper safety evaluations, an argument the judge seemed to entertain. Mifepristone has been used with a high success rate for more than 2 decades in the U.S. and around the world. It's considered so safe it can actually be prescribed by telehealth and sent by mail in the United States. Its removal from the market would have serious impacts.
It isn't crazy to think that if you can make a case that somehow the FDA, which is one of the world's best, I think, regulatory agencies on drugs and therapeutics, that if you can make a case that they...
The funny thing about that is that they don't regulate things like, say, vitamins or supplements or any of that shit, right? So, you know, yeah, they're totally very fucking good about that. So, as well as, like, you know, approving things like, say, yellow number 5 or 20, whatever. I think we do that here as well. Like, ours is also pretty dog shit. But yeah, it's just silly, right?
Somehow we're not thinking about the safety and that this was all too rushed. Why not make that argument for every reproductive drug, such as birth control?
Here's the thing, though. When it, like, the thing is that I actually could see them making that case. It's not unreasonable to assume that they would be trying to make that case, like if they succeed with the abortion pill one, right? The thing is that, you know, uh, despite all of the intrinsic factors that, you know, go into, like, say, teenage pregnancy, for example, there's, you know, the conservatives don't give a shit as long as it, like, doesn't happen to their daughter or whatever the fuck, or like their wife getting fucking knocked up by her husband's boyfriend or whatever the fuck, you know, it's, they're still going to end up restricting access to that. Like, first it comes abortion, and then it actually becomes, you know, why can't I ban him? But yeah, like, we will like, it's not unreasonable to assume that they would actually, you know, ban that. Like, it's inevitably going to happen, right? So it's just more or less of a matter of time. Because remember, a lot of these fucking people who are pushing for this have a lot of fucking money as well, on top of their idiotic ideology, and they want them to have access to it, but not you, right? The people who end up getting hurt by this is you know, the poor and whatever, and, you know, those people, right? Marginalized communities, you know, not unsurprising.
It's worth pointing out this case was specifically brought up in a jurisdiction where it would be heard by a judge who has a track record of anti-abortion statements, a practice known as judge shopping. The hearing wrapped with the judge saying a final ruling will come in the next few days. The losing side is all but certain to appeal, right up to the Supreme Court. Ever since the fall of Roe versus Wade, anti-abortion groups have been looking to chip away at the few remaining legal avenues for reproductive care using tactics exactly like this. There's real concern about the precedent this case could set in allowing a judge to interfere in regulatory decisions made by a government agency, especially when it comes to access to certain medicines. Donna?
All right, Jackson in Washington, thank you.
But yeah, no. Completely ridiculous.
A mental health crisis.
So yeah, and then, you know, there's also New York forcing hospitalization of mentally ill people, which, yeah, that's fucking cool. Like, America's becoming more and more of a fucking fascist hellhole than, you know, like by the day, right? And we're gonna follow in the footsteps because of them, because we're fucking idiots and have, you know, we have North America brain. We can't think for ourselves.
In plain sight. It almost goes unnoticed until it all goes wrong. A random attack, a public breakdown.
EMS call volume.
Longtime New York paramedic and union VP Anthony Almagera sees it in his work every day.
Somebody's got to call 911 for the mental health episodes and urgency and crisis that's happening here.
The city's mayor has stepped up with an ambitious mental health plan. But one policy in particular has raised concerns.
This directive lays out an expedited step-by-step process for involuntarily transporting a person experiencing a mental health crisis to a hospital for evaluation.
That announcement in November sparked protests.
Out of sight, out of mind. Out of sight, out of mind is a publicity stunt and is not public safety.
Like, here's the thing, right? Is that, you know, we also do this shit, like, we do this shit a lot for no really good reasons. You know, we do this shit a lot and say, like, you know, say black people protesting have mental illnesses or whatever the fuck, right? Like, it's just going to be used to force a lot of what, you know, these fucking psychopaths deem as, like, not the norm, and use it to justify the egregious actions that they take out of it, right? Like, there's like, yeah, sure, it you know, people who are experiencing, like, incredibly traumatic events and whatever, like, should be valued, but, you know, they shouldn't be, like, forced to do so when they're fucking, you know, having, say, like, a panic attack from their anxiety or some shit, right?
Now mayors in California are also exploring a similar policy.
It was horrifying.
Arvind Suknanan was forced into hospital as a teenager. He says it's the wrong solution.
While it comes from a good place, I do think that police responding to someone in a mental health crisis is never a good thing.
Almagera says the policy is flawed. He's taken people to hospital before, only to have them back out on the street on the same day.
It's not even a Band-Aid. Band-Aids stop bleeding.
Homeless people.
Adams has pushed back on critics and clarified his new directive.
That is not the entire population. That's a small targeted group, and it was inhumane to allow them to stay on the streets without proper care.
Suknanan and Almagera, both on the front lines, have this message.
You need places for these people to go while they start to put the pieces of their life back together. So if it's long-term inpatient psychiatric hospitals, we need to get those back.
I mean, yeah, absolutely, for sure. Another thing that, you know, we should also be discussing about that is, like, you know, how we go along, or how we fucking do it, right? I think the approach that, you know, places like Sweden or Norway take it, you know, that approach has been proven to work significantly well, right? As well as, like, a lot of these people who they claim to have mental health disorders also tend to be very fucking poor as well. And yeah, there is a mental health component to that for sure, but like, one of the best ways to, like, do it again is, like, housing first policies and offering them the services, and, you know, having them go at their own leisure, right? Instead of, like, forcibly moving them into these facilities and, you know, just completely fucking doing it, right?
We need recovery models that really restore the autonomy and dignity of people with serious mental illness.
On that, the mayor has pleaded for patience.
I didn't become mayor to climb a hill. I became mayor to climb a mountain. This is a mountain that I'm climbing.
A city watching and waiting for lasting change. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Okay.
I'm declaring a public health emergency.
So, we're going to be talking a little bit about COVID. So, for those who don't know, COVID-19 hasn't actually been officially announced as either endemic or over or whatever, right? So, you know, what I imagine will probably happen, and I've seen this, is that for the most part, like, liberals and, like, left have been, wearing a mask when, like, they're sick or something like that. I do it when I'm not feeling too great, like now, for example, when I'm going into places, or or when I'm in a very, very large area, because there's, especially like now, because like there's definitely some shit going around. So, yeah.
Emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
3 years ago, this past Saturday, on March 11th, the WHO made it clear. COVID-19 is a pandemic.
We're deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity. COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
While the health emergency was formally declared by the WHO in January of 2020, for many governments, for many people, things didn't change until that fateful Wednesday in March. And that's when things kicked into high gear. It recommended countries require quarantining, masking, border testing, and that non-essential businesses close. But you remember that. And since the winter of 2020, a committee of experts has met every 3 months to talk about the global state of COVID. Now, even though rules have eased and people are going back to the office, public health restrictions have lifted.
In England, most COVID-19 restrictions have been lifted.
Masks on planes or trains, proof of vaccination, and the use of the ArriveCan app for travelers entering Canada all won't be mandatory anymore.
Globally, the health emergency hasn't been declared over. Despite all the waiting and wondering, what actually happens when it's finally declared over and done? So that committee that's been meeting periodically since 2020, the International Health Regulations Emergency Committee for COVID-19, that's who will make the recommendation about ending it. But ultimately, the call rests with the WHO. And this decision could have some broad implications for drug makers that have agreed to allow generic competition to their COVID treatments and to keep their vaccine prices low until the pandemic ends. The last time the committee met was at the end of January. And at that time, it said we were clearly in a far better situation now than we were a year ago.
The Omicron variant has been reported in 89 countries, with the number of cases doubling every 1.5 to 3 days.
Still, it said it wasn't ready to end the public emergency because there's still low vaccine uptake in low and middle income countries, even though more than 2/3 of the world's population have had at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. Last December, the Director General of the WHO said he's hopeful the world will transition out of the emergency phase of the pandemic this year. But a lot of countries have moved ahead on their own. In the US, President Joe Biden said that the COVID emergency declarations will end on May 11th. Here in Canada, we'll still be following the WHO recommendations.
In the upcoming year, we need to continue to monitor the evolution of the virus.
And when the pandemic is declared officially over, it obviously won't mean that COVID-19 vanishes into thin air. Vaccines will still be available, tracking may still happen, and meetings, including those at the WHO, will likely continue. It does mean the recommendations for how member countries handle the pandemic, the ones that brought most countries to a screeching halt 3 years ago, those recommendations could come to an end. But the overwhelming feeling seems to be that we've already put it behind us in many ways. So
I mean, we pretty much have, though, right?
The emergency is over. It could be more about how we feel than how we act. I'm Lauren Bird. Thanks for watching. See you soon. We've become familiar with a lot of people we may not have known if it weren't for the pandemic. Doctors, nurses, epidemiologists, and advocates. People who stepped up to really help us make sense of a scary time when everything else just came to a stop. We caught up with 3 of those people to find out what the last 3 years have been like for them.
So, I imagine since we're going to be talking about, or since we're going to be getting, you know, 3 different medical professionals, you know, they're most likely going to say, oh, we've been burned out. You know, things have been incredibly fucking, tiresome for them, and, you know, that stuff, right?
I'm Vivian Stamatopoulos, and I am a long-term care advocate and an associate professor at Ontario Tech University.
My name is Samir Gupta. I'm a respirologist and a scientist, and I work at the University of Toronto.
Hi, I'm Fahad Razak. I'm an internal medicine physician at St. Michael's Hospital and a professor at the University of Toronto.
I don't remember exactly where I was, but I remember I was grieving for my grandmother who had just passed, and I was in the process of preparing a funeral and dealing with everything you have to deal with after the death of a loved one, who coincidentally also died in she was living in a long-term care facility.
I was probably curled up in the fetal position somewhere. No, I think it was a clinic day for me, so I was at work. But I think for a lot of us in healthcare, we weren't waiting for the World Health Organization to declare it. A lot of us had heard from colleagues in Italy. Some of us had heard from colleagues in China. We understood that this was something serious.
I was working on the wards at St. Michael's Hospital. We were starting to hear about the virus. We were worried by some of the early evidence saying that it could cause really severe disease, and we were starting to think about how are we going to respond to this thing? What can we do in hospital to make sure we have enough capacity?
Well, I remember
Yeah.
just feeling fearful.
So, like, all of the, you know, regular stuff that we've already known about and we've discussed time and time again, right?
And particularly fearful for what was to come for long-term care residents, because my mind was just completely one-track mind with what had happened to me and my family with long-term care. And I was just concerned with everything I was hearing in the news about how long-term care was being impacted in other countries, and I knew it was going to hit us.
I think, not particularly that moment, but that whole period of time was just a very scary time, I think, for everyone. And it was no different for us in healthcare, maybe heightened because we knew that we would be facing this, that we would be trying to help these patients and being exposed to this virus. And there was still lots and lots of uncertainty at that time about, how we would diagnose it, how we would treat it, what precautions were required, how it was transmitted. None of that was really known at that time. So that was a very frightening time for all of us.
I remember thinking about my family a lot. So when the pandemic started, we had our first child who was just over the age of 1. I have elderly parents in Windsor, Ontario, who were the kind of high-risk patients who looked like they could get very sick if this virus came through. And I started to wonder about how they were going to be protected while we were going to probably have to work some pretty long hours in hospital to keep things afloat.
It's changed in lots of ways. I think for people in healthcare, like everyone in the world, life has changed.
Absolutely. And, like, the thing is that, remember when we, were praising the amount of work that the medical professionals were putting in, whether it be like doctors, surgeons who had, to like postpone surgeries to help with the overflow, the amount of nurses that like not only getting like severely underpaid, but also like overworked incredibly much as well. You know, we kind of shat on them after we declared it as over, right? And unsurprisingly, it's unsurprising, to say the least.
A lot of realizations have come. I think for me, I've always been interested and involved in science communication, but one of the things that's changed is the nature of that science communication. Before the pandemic, it was largely about celebrating advances in health science. It was talking about major discoveries or really important trials. Since the pandemic, I find that it's been largely about misinformation and disinformation, trying to combat that.
The pandemic has really changed the nature of almost everything we do in hospital. The last 3 years were an incredible stress and strain and a roller coaster of emotions. Worried about taking this disease home to our family. How are we going to manage in hospital? And then how are we going to help people around us? And the role that I was able to take on the science table was one of the biggest privileges of my life, to be able to help on the science table, but also a lot of stress and a lot of late nights. And so I think I feel like I have come through a bit of a tunnel these last 3 years, not on the other side of it yet, but feel like a very different person now than I was at the start of the pandemic.
I can say that my research shifted towards long-term care, primarily motivated from my own experiences, which then, melded into my advocacy, and then all the experiences connecting with families, across Ontario, but also across Canada. I mean, the pandemic revealed glaring ageism, glaring sexism, glaring racism, and glaring ableism. The intersectionality of all of these things has been the main reason why this population was harmed as much as it was. Keep in mind, this is a largely older female adult resident population with, disabilities. That are being cared for by a largely female racialized worker population, many of which are women that are new to Canada, and they are being exploited and set up in conditions of work where they are bound to fail.
I think I probably should have known this, but I think the pandemic really drove home for me that even a scientist or a doctor, when they're looking at information, is very much influenced by their political views and their worldviews, and you can have...
Yeah, and that's like... A lot of people like to play fucking politics with this. It's unsurprising that people play it with people's lives. It's completely fucking egregious that they do. And a lot of people ended up dying either due to inaction from the government, whether it be provincial or federal, and completely fucking being like, oh well, we're not gonna fucking, like, conservatives being like, we're not gonna fucking listen to the professionals, we're just gonna do whatever the fuck we want, right? It was incredibly fucking straining, having these fucking hogs go into the system and then them spreading COVID and whatever to other people who were actually trying their best to to take care of themselves and others, and just overstraining the fucking underfunded healthcare system.
A scientist looking at the very same scientific data, but two people with different worldviews will interpret that very differently.
Nothing like this has ever happened, but we...
Like, here's the thing, right? If someone doesn't know or understand what like a topic, right? Say like health, like public health, right? Those people should not get to make those fucking decisions. The experts in those fields should be making those decisions, right? Because if they aren't allowed to make those decisions, then we'll have a bunch of fucking idiots who have, you know, political reasons, monetary reasons, you know, whatever, making those decisions for their own personal gain, right? Like, let's use America as an example. America, right? There were clear political reasons why, you know, Donald Trump didn't clear COVID as an emergency initially, right? And you know, after post post COVID world, you know, when a lot of businesses were pushing Biden to completely what was it? Completely change the time that someone had to say isolate and then not isolate at all, which was completely fucking ridiculous. Like, and you know, the Canadian government, being the fucking sheep that it is, decide to follow in America's footsteps. Like, we can't make up our own fucking minds. Like, like as a country, we're America's pet. Like, come on. Like, nothing changes.
Managed, and we avoided some of the worst outcomes we saw in places like Lombardy, Italy, and New York City. That said, the real shocking first experience of the pandemic for me was what happened in long-term care.
Yeah, and like that's another thing. Like, we don't even really discuss like the long-term care aspect of it, which, funnily enough, like a lot of these long-term care homes where all of these people had died came from private long-term care homes, right? Like, I mean, yeah, sure, like there definitely was those who were there definitely was those who were, you know, in public long-term care and had passed from COVID, but like not nearly as much as the private ones, right? And you know, the thing with we're going to see a huge amount of, you know, people fucking dying in public or not public, private. And I cannot think today. We're going to see a lot of people dying in private clinics, a lot more than what we're used to. But fortunately, we will be discussing that a little bit because the federal government is actually, you know, starting to claw back a little bit with the premiers, which is a good thing because premiers are fucking stupid. And, you know, they're going to be like, okay, if you're not going to be spending this fucking money on healthcare, well, you're not going to be getting it. Simple solution. And that, I can only imagine, has the premiers fucking pissed.
It was unlike anything that I've seen. And I think it's a really dark mark on the Canadian experience of how we protected the most vulnerable among us.
No, I think it's, yeah, it always amuses me when people are like, oh, you're that.
Yeah, and then like the funny thing about this is that, you know, they were just expected to die. Like, oh, we don't give a shit. Sorry. You've had your you've had your fun living on the planet. Sorry, Grandma, it's time to go. Right? Bro, yeah, new fucking mic stand. It's just completely ridiculous. Like, it was so bad. Like it got so bad in long-term care that they had to bring in the fucking military to help out all these fucking private long-term care homes.
That girl, that long-term care girl, or like if I'm ever out and I don't have my mask on, you know, people will sometimes recognize me, and I'm always.
Whoa! What did I do?
Nervous and uncomfortable because it's not something that I feel, you know, a natural doing. but I have, an education that has allowed me to find the data and to find the evidence and be able to use my firsthand experience to communicate a message in a way that apparently is connecting with people. And if that's working, right, and if that's getting some things to budge, if even a little, and to get that ball rolling, well then, you just got to keep at it.
Yeah, definitely not. I'm an engineer originally by training before I went into medicine. These are not professions that train you how to communicate with people. And there was a lot of missteps. Myself, my colleagues, I think it was a real learning curve about how to talk about things honestly but clearly, tell people when we were worried in a way that wasn't alarmist, being able to be reassuring when we thought things were going well. It's been a steep learning curve, and I think one of the questions is what we as health professionals or others could do better in terms of our communication skills. I think it's one of the big learning points coming.
I mean, there definitely is like a communications aspect for sure on medical professionals, but I don't really think the problem lies with medical professionals. I think where the problem lies is with the with the provincial governments, right? A lot of the provincial governments declared COVID over way before they ever should have, right? And unsurprisingly, it was all these fucking conservative ones, right? So, there was also political reasons on why they did so. The convoy being the biggest one. But there was some other political reasons on why they decided to do that as well. But I don't think that, the problem that they had faced falls on the shoulders of the medical professionals. I think they did for, the amount that they had to do and everything, and the tough choices that they had to make. I think that they did a really good job, and we should be thanking our medical professionals even more. And then, whenever they say, oh, we're not getting fucking paid enough, we can't live, maybe we should address problems like that and, listen to them more.
Yeah, I think I had done science communication for a long time before the pandemic, but certainly the frequency, the nature, the urgency of it changed, and the type of work changed a lot too. Much of what I had done before was television or radio, was conventional media, and the importance of having scientific voices on social media really came out during this pandemic because of all of the misinformation and disinformation that was on those channels.
Yeah, but the main problem though, that like people like me will listen to like a lot of scientific voices and experts when it comes to like major events, who are in those fields, right? Obviously. But the thing is that it's so incredibly easy for lies, conspiracies, and misinformation to spread, right? Rather than, like the actual tangible truth of what actually is going on, right? Or what has actually happened. Like, it's unless you're like not staying informed, you're not going to see that stuff until like weeks later, right? Which is why I think when it came down to COVID being declared a pandemic on that Wednesday, right? It came as a shock for most people. Like, I already knew a little bit about what was going on, right? I didn't know too terribly much, but I heard something was going on, was spreading in China, and moving on, and then I was unsurprised by the announcement of the pandemic. Because like ever since it started to spread to like North America and Europe, I'm like, yeah, I have a feeling we're gonna be hearing something from the WHO in sometime soon, right?
And because that's where a lot of young people get their information. It's the only place they get their information. So I think that's one thing that changed for me.
But the funny thing is, when it comes down to a lot of younger people, like a lot of younger people actually, for the most part, actually did fairly good with it, right? The people who really didn't like any of the restrictions that were put in place, you know, whether it be like going into like not being able to go into places, having to wear masks, you know, not being able to socialize and whatever. I think, you know, if memory serves me right, it was the boomers and Gen X primarily who did not really like that, as well as the conservative crowd. But like the conservative crowd literally think anything that they don't like is authoritarian, so there's that. Or fucking communist or whatever the fuck, whatever big scary word they want to use.
is where I do my science communication and which kinds of audiences I'm trying to inform now.
Look, as a physician, as a scientist, I never thought that I would have a job that would allow me to help in this kind of crisis. I was trained to be someone who would do a lot of statistics and work on the wards to care for patients, but suddenly the work we were doing had broader impact about how Canada was going to weather this once in 100 years crisis, really. And so I think the ability to do that and to help has been motivating for all of us. When I look at my colleagues, we feel like we've been able to get out there and help most of the time. We've made our mistakes, but we hope that we've been able to help, and I think that really helps us continue to do the work that we do.
Every family member I've spoken to, every resident that I've connected with, every frontline worker. I mean, when you hear the stories and what they went through, I mean, not for nothing, it changes you. You can't.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that like we did hear all those stories, and you know we felt incredibly bad for them, but now like we have those same LARPers who were like, we feel bad for you, you know, we respect our healthcare workers and whatever. And now those same people are just fucking spitting in the face of the healthcare workers, right? You know, it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, you sure fucking care about the healthcare workers, clearly. Like, you know, when there's a time of unimaginable amounts of struggle going on that, you know, affects them, yeah, of course they're going to be being like, yeah, we support those who are there to, you know, help me, right? But when it comes down to like their needs, right? Yeah, okay, go fuck yourself, right? It's completely ridiculous. And is completely inexcusable.
Stay quiet when you hear firsthand what happened to these people. I mean, it was abject negligence, complete failure, and governments just failing to use proper resourcing to protect both the workers and the residents in these facilities. And I don't see much that has improved. However frustrating,
if anything, it got worse.
Seeing how little meaningful change has occurred, you still have to keep going, because someone told me once, you know, you don't realize it, but at some point something will shift. And it might take a while to get there, but you got to keep fighting. So don't give up, because trust me, you want to give up quite often when you've been doing this for 3 years and you feel like, you know, nothing really is improving all that much that you know it could be, but nobody's doing what needs to be done.
Yep. Sounds about right. All right, let's move on to this article by the Globe and Mail about Ottawa clawing back health funding for private delivery of abortion services in New Brunswick. They've been doing it for more than just New Brunswick. I think they've been doing it for private clinics as well when it comes to like what the premiers have been trying to do, which is good. The federal government is clawing back money from the health transfers in an attempt to force New Brunswick to make publicly funded abortion services more accessible. New Brunswick is the only province that does not fund abortion and standalone clinics, a policy that healthcare advocates say is misogynistic and part of a long-standing legacy to limit abortion rights in the province, which is true. The Liberal government deducted $270,000 for abortion services provided at Clinic 554 in Fredericton over the last 3 years to penalize the province for its continued refusal to provide the medically necessary services without fees as outlined in the Canada Health Act. So it is really good to see that the Liberal government is actually starting to enforce the Canada Health Act, right? You know, it's the bare fucking minimum that they should be doing. But it's a start, right? The total was a 3-year period ending in 2020 and calculated by the amount of money patients paid for an abortion out of pocket based on evidence provided by Clinic 554 and data published by the Canadian Institute for Health Information. You're not taking money we're not taking money for the sake of taking money, said Gilliam Martin, a spokesperson for the Federal Minister of Health, Jan Yves Ducos. If provinces work with us to address the issue, we'll give them the money back. Yeah, like, that's how it should be. Sorry. If you're going to be giving, or if you're going to be making, you know, procedures that are covered by the public system, yeah, no, you shouldn't be, they shouldn't be getting money. Sorry. That's just the way it is. You're not going to change my mind on that, bud. However, so far New Brunswick has refused to co-opt added Mr. Brightman, unlike other provinces where were dangled for other medically necessary services such as diagnostic imaging. Last week, the federal government announced it was clawing back $82.5 million in the Canada Health transfer for 2022 for 2020 21 to 7 provinces, including New Brunswick, which was deducted $1.3 million, 46 or 64,850, which was for abortions in Clinic 554. New Brunswick, the New Brunswick government said in a statement that it's fully committed to the principles of the Canada Health Act. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sure, we believe you. We are continuing to assess the potential implications of this federal decision, said spokesperson Sean Hatchard. Yeah, we totally believe that, right? Yeah. You're just giving fucking money to private, for-profit, clinics. The province only funds abortions in hospitals in, what? Bro, I've never heard, like, any Atlantic Canadian, cities. Moncton and Bathurst, which Valerie Edelman of Clinic 554 says is a barrier for people coming from other parts of the province. In its response to the Globe and Mail, the province said, Mifgilmos, better known as the abortion pill, has reduced the demand for frequental abortions in New Brunswick. The drug is available by prescription only and is a combination of two drugs that can be taken at home with guidance and monitoring from a healthcare professional during the first 9 weeks of pregnancy. Miss Edelman, a social worker who runs Clinic 554, said the suggestion that chemical abortions address the accessibility problem in New Brunswick fails to consider that people accessing abortions at the clinic are often the most vulnerable and at risk. They may not have a safe home, or there may be mental health barriers in the ability to self-manage a chemical abortion, she said. I mean, yeah, but like, guess what? Your doctor would already know about that stuff, right? Like the mental health stuff, like the at-risk populations, just say poor, right? It's the poor. It's the poor, like, it's just the way that it is. They're often in very dire circumstances and can't afford the costs, said Miss Eldman. The $700 to $850 fees for a procreational or proconcetal abortion are often offset by deductions from the National Abortion Federation and subsidized by Clinic 554 for patients that can't afford to pay, she added. I mean, it should be free regardless. It's a medical necessity that people need access to. And paying up to, what most people would probably make within, like, a paycheck. Like, or at least maybe or maybe like even like 70 to 80% of their paycheck is ridiculous. Especially when we already have a vast majority of Canadians living paycheck to paycheck. Right? Ms. Edelman applauded the move to claw back federal transfer funds and said it highlights the need for the province to change its restrictive abortion policies. I agree. But said it does not address the urgent need for improved abortion access in New Brunswick. Misogynistic, she said, about the provincial misogynistic, she said about the provincial policy. For decades, New Brunswick has gotten away with really terrible access to abortions, and it's only because of public pressure that it has improved over the years. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think New Brunswick is a fairly conservative province. So I'm not really surprised by that. The accessibility of abortions is the subject of a University of New Brunswick led study founded by the federal government or funded by the federal government. It will look at the number of patients who access abortion care at Clinic 554, where they traveled from, and their ability to pay. The report will also be made public by next year. We'll probably end up taking a look at that because I'm kind of curious to see what that report finds. I imagine that it could be up to like anywhere into like 70 to 80% of people going to the clinic might have problems with paying. Either that or like this clinic is going to make an ass load of money out of it, right? And turn down people who are not able to get an abortion there, right? Clinic 554 provides provides 2 to 3 abortions a week and is at capacity. I wonder why, said Miss Edelman. Numbers provided by the Canadian Institute for Health Information show that about 1/6 of the pre-cerebral abortion performed in Brunswick in 2018 occurred at Clinic 554. The vast majority of all abortions in Canada are done in clinics. Not surprising. Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party pledged during the 2021 election campaign to introduce regulations under the Canada Health Act to ensure abortion services were medically necessary and publicly funded. But after constituting with stakeholders, priorities have shifted, said Mr. Bartrand. The focus is now on helping organizations to make sexual and reproductive information and services more available, he said. I mean, you can do both, right? Like, yeah, the information and service, like, yeah, you can do that, right? But you can also like fund, like, keep your fucking campaign promises too. Like, enforce that shit through the fucking Canada Health Act. While you're at it, do that with fucking dental and like, eyeglasses and hearing aids and shit like that. Come on. And prescription drugs too. There's no reason why we can't, right? We're trying to work with the province, but at the end of the day, it's the province's responsibility to provide healthcare, said Mr. Bartrand. But we need to push for abortion services. Yeah, true.
Forbes listed Silicon
So let's move on to the Silicon Valley Bank stuff.
Valley among the best of America's banks for 2023, just days before it collapsed.
So the thing is that the Silicon Valley Bank was one of the largest banks in America, right? And it collapsed, very eerily similar to the 2008 financial crisis. What happened? They essentially put all their fucking money. Like they didn't have any liquid assets for people to withdraw, right? And like to my knowledge, I think that most of the people that were doing this shit was like incredibly fucking rich people, right? Um, but I do think that there was like maybe some people who also use this bank, right? That that also that used it, right? But yeah, from my understanding, it was a lot of fucking like bonds and shit that they put people's money into, and you know, yeah, that's it. It was not a good look, good turnout for that. But I feel for those who like are actually working class and like had money in there and then wanted to withdraw, not being able to do so. But it's kind of funny that like all these like libertarians and whatever were fucking crying about we're like crying and like adding POTUS on Twitter, being like, "Please help us, good sir. We've done nothing wrong." As well as like another thing that uh yeah, like they were fucking whining about that, and then like they were the same fucking people who were crying about like when people's student loan debt, like a small amount of people's student loan debt was forgiven, right? Um, but another thing that uh made them go under was all of the deregulation and the lobbying that they did for the Trump government, being like, "Hey, let us deregulate our banking and everything like that." Remember that? Remember how that happened, right? Um, but yeah, it's it's not surprising. I have a feeling that we're gonna see a lot more of this in the future. It's really only a matter of time.
I am absolutely shocked at the swiftness of how the entire fiasco unfolded.
Rising interest rates limited tech companies' ability to raise money, forcing them to burn through their cash and pull money out of SVB. On March 8th, to fund client redemptions, SVB sold $21 billion worth of government bonds at a loss as they plummeted in value when interest rates climbed. Still strapped for cash, SVB announced the sale of $2.25 billion in stock, which sent its stock plummeting.
I mean, yeah, and then when people see this, they're going to want to pull their fucking money out, right? Because if, you know, shit hits the fan, they're not going to have any money to fall back on, except that I think those who who you know, were didn't have up to like, or had up to like I think it was $240,000 we're gonna be getting that back, right? I think I think that was right.
A bank run ensued when too many customers tried to withdraw their money at the same time. Tech financier John
This is
Ruffalo
why
analyzed
regulations
how
are
its collapse would
important, by
affect
the way.
Canada and shared his findings with Ottawa.
We were able to produce that data over 48 hours, which gave us the necessary statistics to understand that the impact to Canada was quite low.
Our national banking regulator has temporarily seized the assets of the loan branch of SVB in this country. Its business in Canada
That's
primarily
funny.
lending to corporate clients, and the branch doesn't hold any commercial or individual deposits.
It was a very sobering moment for tech.
C100 is a global community of Canadians in tech. SVB was a foundational partner.
They would end up sponsoring events. They would provide funding to organizations and not-for-profits such as ours. They brought a lot of entrepreneurs together.
SVB's demise highlights the risk introduced in 2018 when then-President Donald Trump rolled back regulation put in place to ensure the financial crisis wouldn't happen again.
But don't forget, the mom and pop banks need to make money despite the fact that they got fucking steamrolled by bigger banks with lower deregulation.
The legislation I'm signing today rolls back the crippling Dodd-Frank regulations that are crushing community banks and credit unions nationwide.
In the wake of SVB's implosion, bond markets are dramatically repricing, causing a rethink of the Bank of Canada's next moves. Many investors now betting that our central bank will cut rates by 0.25 percentage point at its April 12th meeting. Donna?
All right, and Gaviola in Toronto, thanks.
Okay.
It took only a matter of hours for the 16th largest bank in the United States to go from stable ground to underwater.
I'm pretty concerned.
Silicon Valley Bank was a go-to in the tech world. Decades of experience turned it into a leading lender for startups. Now, its sudden and abrupt downfall has trapped billions in investments and deposits.
A little nerve-wracking when it comes down to how you keep operating your company.
The concern started midweek when, in need of assets, the bank sold off bonds, but at a loss. Its capital shrank and resulted in the beginnings of a bank run. By Friday, federal regulators swooped in to provide financial guardrails.
That's what they were doing, was protecting the deposits of those up to $250,000, and then they have a way to unwind the rest.
That could throw a wrench into some companies' finances if they're unable to access money beyond the insured $250,000.
When banks experience financial losses, it is and should be a matter of concern.
Before the dust could settle, markets were rattled and sell-offs could bleed into Monday. Blame is being partially laid on high interest rates, with the Fed now walking a tightrope.
On the one hand, they're trying to tame inflation, and in the process, they might tip the economy into a recession. At the same time, we have this emerging financial instability risk.
This is the largest bank failure since the 2008 crisis. And while niche banks tied to one sector may feel stress, major institutions are likely to avoid catastrophic loss.
The reforms that were put into place back then really provide the kind of resilience that we'd like to see.
Silicon Valley Bank did have operations in Canada, and the big banks felt the squeeze, erasing nearly $20 billion in value on Friday. Many of them have acquired regional banks in the U.S., increasing exposure to this bank's failure.
I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Oh. What? How long was this? Guess we can maybe watch this. Listed. Hours, man.
Investors in the banks will not be protected. They knowingly took a risk, and when the risk didn't pay off, investors lose their money. That's how capitalism works.
Hey, welcome to About That. I'm Kieran Outshorn, sitting in for Andrew Chang. Now, that was U.S. President Joe Biden saying that investors in Silicon Valley Bank are SOL when it comes to protection for the second largest bank collapse in the country's history. And in case you missed it,
the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank is causing shockwaves across the entire business world.
Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, is part of the tech establishment.
Silicon Valley Bank's collapse set off a panic.
Up until last weekend, Silicon Valley Bank was a commercial bank in the U.S. It served mostly startups and tech companies in California, and it collapsed pretty dramatically on March 10th when it was shut down by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. That's the government agency that oversees the banking industry. And the shutdown has a lot of people very worried.
If you have $1 in a U.S. bank right now, you must listen to this message. One of the biggest banks in America just collapsed.
I don't know why it was so funny
so
hearing the sad music
and why is it
with
causing
a bunch of people doing that. That's kind of fucked up with me. Sorry.
Well, in order to understand what took SVB down so fast, we should start at the most basic level. What does a bank do with the money that you put in it? Well, you make a deposit, the bank can lend that money out, and they earn interest on it and make profit.
This is the way
But the
that
bank has
banking
to hold
works.
on to a certain amount of those deposits. It's reserves, so that you can take money out when you want to. Now, the U.S., they're able to hold maybe 10% of the deposits that are usually sitting there. So that's 10%.
Which is like nothing, by the way.
And the thing is that not everyone can take money out at the same time. Like I said, they're only holding on to 10%. And some of these smaller banks, they don't have the same amount of deposits in cash. And that's where everything went totally wrong for SVB. Now, remember, I mentioned that it funded mostly tech startups and companies like that. Well, they were raising a ton of money during the pandemic, and then they dumped most of that money into the banks. But they haven't been doing that great over the last year.
Tech stocks have had a rough 2022, but can the sector turn it around in the new year? Well, joining us now, Rohit Kulkarni from MKM Partners. Rohit, can big cap tech turn it around next year?
It's going to be tough.
Because of the soaring interest rates, those companies are having a harder time raising capital. For a lot of them, they've seen their companies tank in value. So they've been taking out more and more money from the bank to cover those costs. And it's meant that banks like Silicon Valley have been getting short on cash themselves. So short that they've had to sell some of their assets at a loss. Now, let me explain. SVB had taken out a lot of money that the tech companies had been depositing during the pandemic, and they bought long-term bonds, which is totally legit and is usually a pretty good idea. Lots of banks hold on to treasury bonds because they're a pretty safe investment in the long term. They're basically loans from citizens to the US government, and they're easy to sell if you need money. But the thing about the bonds is that when interest rates drop, the value of the bonds increase. And when interest rates rise, like they have been, those bonds' value decreases. And so SVB, well, they bought a lot of those bonds when interest rates were at historic lows. So they were really expensive.
Like, I'm not gonna lie, really. A lot of the the investment shit always has kind of bored me, like put me to sleep and whatever. So like I understand like the basics of how it works, right? But like it's just so fucking boring, man.
And now, well, we all know what's been happening in the last year. We've all seen the interest rates skyrocketing, which has lowered the bond prices. So when SVB was forced to sell their bonds at a loss, it took a big hit. Then it announced that it needed to raise more than $2 billion.
I mean, this is also what happens when you have private banks operate everything, right? It should all be, like, all the banks should be controlled federally, honestly. Like, it would be a lot more stable than having everything controlled privately. Because, you know, the banks are still, like, driven by profit, so they want to make as much money as possible, right? And, you know, but, like, regardless of, like, you know, what you want to, like, the only way to, like, completely get rid of banks, if that's what your ultimate objective is, like, not have any currency, right? Because, like, for as long as there's been currency, you're always going to have a bank. That's just the way it's going to be. That's the way it has always been. You know, if you actually wanted to get rid of currency altogether, for the most part, you literally, especially like here in the West, all you literally have to do is just like get rid of people's debt. That's pretty much all you have to do. But with some, like, that's the very, like, bare bones of it, right? Because it's, like, built off of, like, credit and debt, right?
To keep up just with withdrawals. And that's when investors and venture capital firms really started sweating. Now, venture capital funds started advising their tech companies and startup clients to take their money out of the bank, which caused a panic and led to a run on the bank. That's when everybody goes to pull their money out at the same time, or at least tries to. And those reserves that I mentioned earlier, well, they're gone. No longer there to cover the wave of withdrawals.
This was a run on a bank with a difference. In Silicon Valley, not regular customers of a high street bank, but tech firm CEOs here, startup bosses, desperately seeking their cash.
So here's the thing, right? Since it's like all fucking CEOs and whatever, first of all, I think it's kind of funny that a lot of those people who are crying about, like, a lot of these people cried about, you know, when Biden forgave like a small fraction of student loan debt, but now they're like, oh, please, give us all of our money back. Yeah, it's really fucking funny. And like, you know, if it was like liquid assets that, you know, you earned your fucking self and everything, it's fine, whatever, you know, you should be, yeah, you should be able to pull that out. But a lot of these people also have to, like, their biggest fucking fear that they're worried about right now, it's not the amount of money that they have, right? You know, it's like CEOs and shit, and they're concerned about being part of the working class again, because they recognize how dog shit, you know, they treat their fucking workers, and they don't want to be part of that fucking class again.
They just came out and told us that the bank is shut down.
So SVB made the announcement last Wednesday, and by the end of Thursday, just a day later, customers had withdrawn a whopping $42 billion of deposits from the bank. And the bank had a negative cash balance of $958 million. So its stock
Damn, bro.
sunk, and the regulators, well, they shut down the bank.
The FDIC has now put out a
I mean,
release
rightfully
with
so,
regard
right?
to the now wind down of Silicon Valley Bank. In their news release, but the FDIC rather says that Silicon Valley Bank Santa Clara was closed today by the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation.
I mean, it went up.
A
It's
receiver
supposed to
bank
be
has been
good.
now set up to basically take over all of the operations of Silicon Valley Bank.
And all that chaos.
Let's
It
go.
sent shockwaves through the financial markets and right around the world.
Concerns growing over the stability of what was a tech-focused lender in the Valley. Many called it the backbone of Silicon Valley. It lost nearly $2 billion selling assets following a greater than expected decline in deposits. But here's the problem. Venture capitalists reportedly advising their portfolio companies to pull their money from the bank. Those concerns, of course, rippling through the banking sector.
Okay, so it's still pretty early to say exactly how all this is going to play out. But here's what we do know. Unlike the government's response in 2008, the U.S. says that it's not bailing out SVB. President Joe Biden.
That's actually kind of surprising, because the usual the usual fucking play here is you bail out the bank, right? Even though they're making incredibly fucking risky plays. Like, it's just what you do. That's very surprising.
Deposits will be covered by insurance and that the clients will get their money back. So to talk about the wider implications of all this, my colleague Lauren Bird spoke with Ray Wong. He's the CEO of a Silicon-based consultancy called Constellation Research.
Hi, Ray.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Pretty good.
So tell me, how did we get to this point?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is low interest rates for a long period of time, an IPO market dearth, right? There was 151 IPOs in 2021. That's 10x less than the 1035 we had the year before. I mean, that's how crazy it's been, right? And just that IPO dearth has been increasing. I mean, it's like the focus on high tech, on biotech, right? Suddenly come crashing, and then the interest rates came up so quickly.
Right. So it all just happened kind of very quickly. So, like, how does this really compare to other bank collapses that we've seen? I know we're saying it's the second largest one in U.S. history.
Yeah, this one is because it's highly concentrated, right? Silicon Valley Bank was focused on high tech, biotech. Their founders and investors would bank with them. They do their personal loans there, their mortgage loans. So this was a big one to come down. And it really was coming down to the fact that unrealized losses, right? You get a sudden interest rate hike. You've got a lot of money sitting there, and people bought long-term bonds thinking that that would be safe, not realizing that interest rates were going to keep going up. And when that happens, your interest rates are, much lower than what the outside interest rates are when you cash out, and you end up creating these losses.
So, what happens then to people banking here and to companies banking here?
Well, the challenge was in this era of crisis of confidence, what happened was people no longer trusted the leaders. So when a bank CEO comes out and says, oh, everything is fine, don't worry, it'll be okay, people actually react in the opposite direction. You add social media to that, and actually what happened was a run on the bank. So even if everything was fundamentally correct at the bank, the run on the bank already occurred, and there's not much you can do once a bank run has occurred other than for the federal government to step in to help out.
Do you think social media really played into that in a big way?
Social media played largely into this. What we saw was Peter Thiel, we saw the Y Combinator folks,
Oh yeah,
we
that's
saw
right.
the
I forgot
VCs
that
piling
Peter
on
fucking
social
was
media
crying
saying,
about it
hey,
on
you better
Twitter. It
get
was
your
really
money
funny.
out very quickly. And we started hearing this on Wednesday, and then we started hearing even more on Thursday. And by the time it hit Friday, a lot of people had already gotten enough money out of there, almost 48 billion in terms of orders. I mean, banks don't keep more than 10% of what their deposits are on hand.
Right. So are we going to see this expand into other banks? Is there going to be a knock-on effect here?
Well, hopefully the Fed has controlled the contagion by saying, look, all the losses, including the ones above $250,000, will be protected. The challenge is we also have a lot of regional banks that might be in that situation and smaller banks. What we don't want to be is in a situation where there are only 4 large U.S. banks that are left. Think about that. That would just be Citi, Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America left in the mix. And the smaller banks play a huge role in terms of regional business, helping out with
He's
auto
right about
loans, or
that.
helping out with banking advice, or helping out with things that you normally wouldn't see in a larger bank, a different level of service. That's what's going to be missing.
Right. And when we're talking about bailing the bank out, I mean, U.S. officials have said that's not going to happen this time. What's that going to mean?
I'm not sure what the difference is between a rescue and a bailout here, because it's certainly to look like a bailout from this perspective. But if you can guarantee that the assets are there, but you need someone else to pick up the bank at those assets for this to work. So some larger bank will actually have to acquire these assets. Otherwise, it's the government really bailing it out, or the FDIC paying out the insurance premium on the lost assets.
Wow. It's going to be interesting to watch for sure. Ray Wong, thank you so much.
Hey, thanks a lot.
So we have a sense of what's happening in the States, but what about the implications here in Canada? Experts say that the impact won't be huge, but it will be felt in the venture sector.
That's effectively stopped.
Not sure my account's logged. My Twitter account.
We're very concerned that the whole ecosystem is at some meaningful risk.
Okay.
So for more on all of this, we're joined by Heather Long. She's an editorial writer and columnist for The Washington Post, and she joins us from Washington. Heather, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time.
Good morning.
So on Sunday night, we saw the U.S. regulators announce this emergency measures to ease fears that depositors might pull their money or pull more of their money out of smaller lenders after the SVB collapse. Then we saw an accelerated bank sell-off. We've seen jittery investors on the markets. Where do we stand now in being able to assess the actions that were taken by the government and where the stability of the financial system is right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, as your guest noted, there's still a lot of anxiety and jitters going on. You could see that in a number of these other regional bank stocks, which were down 40%, in one case 60% yesterday. So there's still clearly a lot of fear. The good news, if there's good news here, is that we are not seeing another bank failure. So we saw those two fail over the weekend, and so far we've been able to backstop the system well enough that we're not seeing any more collapses. That said, it's unclear how many depositors are just giving up on these mid-sized banks and moving to a bigger, like a Bank of America or a JP Morgan Chase. We'll get a little bit of a taste of that The real key here that's helped the system is this Federal Reserve emergency lending for banks, $25 billion worth. It's just a big bazooka that was fired by the Fed to try to pump enough money into the system so no other bank will become Silicon Valley where they can't give money to their customers. That seems to be working, but we're going to get a little bit of a check on that in a couple of days to know how much had to be tapped from that line of credit for these different banks. So I would say overall, it's an encouraging sign, but again, until we see some hard numbers, anxiety will remain.
I'm going to keep your bazooka analogy in mind as we talk about in terms of the best offense being a defense, and in terms of what you're writing in the Washington Post, I'm just going to read a line from that. Bankers are once again taking unwise risk, and regulators once again too lax. We thought we went through this in 2008. Have we learned our lesson? And if
Nope.
so, what is the lesson we've learned from this latest chapter?
Sadly, the lesson we learned is it wasn't enough. It's crazy to be sitting in the same situation that
they literally didn't learn their lesson, and you know, the same shit happened. What do you know? Who would have thought, right? Like, it's ridiculous. But like, it's not unsurprising either. It's only a matter of time, right? And it's also like the fucking capitalist cycle as well, right? Booms and busts. We're entering our fucking bust period. And that's going to hurt, everyone from poor to middle class, or lower to middle class, right?
we were 15 years ago. What's the difference now versus then? The banks that really needed to be bailed out by the government 15 years ago in that financial crisis we all remember so well, those were really, really large institutions that were names that were known in Canada and Europe and Japan and China. What we're dealing with today is much, much smaller institutions, these so-called mid-sized institutions. So what happened in the United States is we put in place really tough rules after that financial crisis. We were going to stress test all these banks every year. We were going to require them to have a certain amount of cash.
Yeah, that totally happened, right?
So we wouldn't have a bank run again. Unfortunately, in 2018, there was a big rollback of those protections.
I mean, to be fair though, like, literally none of that, to my knowledge, happened anyways. Like, I don't think any of the banks were like stress test or whatever. So, yeah.
For mid-sized banking institutions. So any institution with 250 billion or less in assets suddenly did not have those tight requirements. Guess how many assets Silicon Valley Bank had? 200 billion. So there you go, just under that threshold for qualifying for the tighter restrictions. That's probably a big part of the reason we are in the predicament
I wonder why.
this week.
I wonder why they were under or $50 million underneath that threshold. I wonder why that is. Could it be, if they reached that threshold, they would have tighter regulations to deal with? It's to say.
President yesterday, Joe Biden, saying that there would be a greater regulation, but still, as we look at this again, where are we today? Can we breathe a sigh of relief? Is contagion contained? Where are we?
I think so. Now, I'd like to be able to say 100% positively it's contained, but the reality is if confidence fails, if we see something similar to what we saw on Thursday with Silicon Valley Bank, where a bunch of those businesses, in this case a lot of startups and venture capitalists, were literally slacking each other. They were on one of those chat programs telling each other to withdraw money. The amount of money they withdrew in a day, 42 billion. There's a lot of banks in the US and Canada that would struggle to be able to deal with that level of sudden withdrawals. So theoretically, we're safe. This backstop, this big bazooka from the Federal Reserve has been fired, and it should be enough to prevent any more bank runs. The United States government is also signaling to everyone that we will protect all these customers, even ones who probably should be allowed to have a few losses. So the protections are there, but again, confidence can be very tricky. And I've heard a lot of phone calls from different businesses and different individuals who are debating, should I move my money out of Zions Bank or Pac Corp or one of these Western Alliance, one of these other banks that's really under pressure right now. So far, it seems to be a modest move of money out of there, but I think we'll all feel much better if we can make it to the end of the week without any big withdrawals.
Okay, let's talk about that end of the week, or at least in the coming days, in terms of how this might affect, say, interest rates, political fallout. What are you watching for in, say, the next 2 weeks out of all of this?
Yeah, it's crazy that just a few days ago we were expecting the Federal Reserve in the United States to hike those interest rates possibly by 50 basis points, so a quite sizable increase to try to control inflation. Obviously, after the events, after having the second and third largest bank failure in U.S. history, we are starting to see things break with this really rapid increase in interest rates in the United States in the past year.
It's kind of like, the capitalist system isn't sustainable or anything, and a lot of the contradictions within it, end up leading to its repeated failures over and over.
I personally think the Fed will probably go on pause in March, just give some time to assess the situation, to see how things play out, to stabilize. But this morning in the United States, just before coming on here, we saw the latest inflation report for the U.S. It's still high. We're at 6% inflation for the past year. That is well above the 2% target. And unfortunately, a lot of the inflation now is that really
He's the one responsible.
stubborn services inflation. So inflation for shelter, for waiters and waitresses, for recreation, for going out on travel, all these services type industries. And that's really hard to tamp out. So you can see why the Federal Reserve has been aggressive, and I'm not sure they've stopped for good.
One final question for you, if I could, Heather, around all of the potential political ramifications of all of this. What's going through, well, I was asking you what's going through Joe Biden's mind. What might be going through Joe Biden's mind in terms of all of this and his possible...
Literally nothing. Nothing is going on through his mind. Like, not a single thought is going on through there. It's just all white noise.
Very likely call for that he will serve as a candidate for re-election. What are the political metrics you think are being considered in all of this?
It's really interesting. In the Washington Post, we've reported on some of those behind the scenes over the weekend. It was a crazy weekend for the White House. When the president was first briefed on a lot of this, he didn't want to do a bailout. He wanted to make sure the word bailout could not be used. He was obviously in the White House during some of that fallout of the financial crisis. He knows the backlash. He knows how frustrated middle-class Americans are to feel like they are constantly asked to bear the brunt of the economic problems, while the rich people in Silicon Valley and Wall Street get bailed out. They were able to sort of do a little bit of a dance here. They're using money from a bank fee that's paid to the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation to do this quote bailout, but it's not taxpayer money that's being directly used this time. Overall, what does this mean for Joe Biden?
It shouldn't fall on the taxpayers in order to bail out fucking rich idiots who made a stupid decision and made risky plays. Like, sorry, they shouldn't.
He was just last night in California campaigning, and with some of his donors, he loves to tout the economy. Certainly the job situation looks very good. We've avoided a recession so far. He's got a lot of positives to run on, but he better hope, like the rest of us, that this banking crisis is done.
Okay, great talking
Time will
to you,
tell.
Heather. Wonderful to get your insight on all of this. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John.
Editorial writer and columnist for the Washington Post.
All right, so let's talk about the alleged election interference. So we'll be talking about that a little bit.
Federal government is opening consultations on a foreign influence transparency registry. It comes as the government deals with a string of revelations in the news about alleged Chinese election meddling. Global News published a new report on Friday. This one identifies Ontario Progressive Conservative MPP Vincent Ke as an alleged member of Beijing's clandestine interference network. He
Bro,
denies
of
that
course
claim,
it was a
but the CEC
conservative.
has not independently confirmed that report. Marco Mendicino is the Minister of Public Safety, and he joins me now. Minister, thanks for coming in yet again.
Thanks for having me.
I wonder if I can pick up on this report from Global. We now have intelligence and public reporting identifying, alleging a federal MP, a provincial MPP, and some municipal officials as potentially agents of the Chinese government or with connections to the Chinese government. Does that not strengthen the case for a public inquiry here?
Well, it's one of the options that we are going to leave on the table through the imminent appointment of a special rapporteur, someone who will have the ability to work closely with the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, with the National Security Intelligence Review Agency, and then put forward a recommendation, a suggestion as to what the next best practical steps are, including potentially an inquiry, and we will respect it. I think more importantly than that, we continue to put in place the measures, the resources, the authorities that are needed, but at the same time being transparent with Canadians as to how we are fighting against foreign interference so that they can have confidence in their institutions.
You're being transparent on what you're doing to fight foreign interference, but is there a path here for more transparency? What exactly the government can say and can't say? Can there be a declassification of documents, or some sort of way of being more open about what the intelligence is saying and not saying? Because there's a picture being painted by these reports that you say is not true, but we have no evidence that we can lay on the table to judge it against.
I think it's a fair question, and since we've taken the reins of government in 2015, we've looked at ways to become more transparent so we can shine a light on how we protect our institutions, and I would cite the example.
Like, honestly, like, at this point, just fucking open an inquiry, right? Like, I was... last time we talked about this, I said the exact same thing. Just open up an inquiry, If you got nothing to hide, you should be fine. But if you have something to hide, you're not going to do it, right? So, like, just do it at this point. Like, a lot of people want it done already.
Of our elections, where through the creation of independent panels that are made up of our top civil servants who are not partisan, we're able to explain the circumstances and the concerns around foreign interference in our elections. That then gets published, and through those publications, we're able to have a conversation about it as we are having right now. I would also point out that we put in place additional powers for our national security agencies, like threat reduction powers for CSIS, like cracking down on foreign funding so that we can choke it off before it can be used to interfere with our elections. And it's very important. And I think that the special rapporteur will be able to then work with the two other agencies. And I would point out that the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians is a way in which we can work across partisan lines to produce thoughtful recommendations, a couple of which we are acting on, and my colleague Minister LeBlanc is going to survey the rest of the recommendations that have been put forward so we can put them into action as well.
But we have these public reports of intelligence pointing to Han Dong, who sits in your caucus, to Vincent Ke, who sits in Doug Ford's caucus, and to Michael Chan, who is a deputy mayor in Markham. That's federal, provincial, municipal. Is there not an urgency to be more transparent on what exactly intelligence has told the government about these three individuals?
Well, these are individuals that were elected by their constituents, and that reassures Canadians that it is they and they alone who elect their parliamentarians. And we will continue to take additional steps to be transparent through the creation of the critical incident reporting protocol, which I think has served Canadians well, but looking at ways in which we can further improve it. There were some recommendations that Morris Rosenberg, a distinguished long-standing public servant who put together a report for us. We're going to move on those. Again, you heard my colleague, Minister LeBlanc, say we're going to implement that. We're going to work with a special rapporteur. We're going to work with our NCIRA and CCOP colleagues so that we can raise the bar when it comes to being transparent.
You started the consultations on the foreign agent registry today. This is something that national security experts have called for a while, and which has been recommended by NSICOP for a couple of years now. Would we even be at this point if it wasn't for this controversy and this reporting that's happening?
Based on our track record, the answer to that question is yes. Our government is guided by the advice that we get from our national security agencies around the threats
that exist on our landscape, including as it relates to landscape. And when you take a look at the powers that we've introduced, the authorities that we've introduced, the resources that we've invested, the bodies and agencies that we have created to be able to shine a light on how we do this work, Canadians can be confident that we will remain vigilant when it comes to fighting against foreign interference.
So what's the timeline to have something like this in place? I mean, will we have this in 2023? Will we absolutely have this before the next election? When will the Foreign Agent Registry be done?
Well, today we launched the consultation. We plan to conclude the consultation by May 9th, so there's a good focused timeline. But I also want to make sure that we bring along all Canadians. And you heard from my colleague, Minister Ng, this morning, who expressed concerns about members of the Chinese-Canadian diaspora who were worried about being painted with the same brush, which is wrong, because they and every other Canadian, regardless of background, has a right to fully participate in all of our institutions, including in our politics, in our elections. And so as we create these new authorities, it's important that they can be sure, and all Canadians can be sure, that it is embedded in the values of the Charter, that we are transparent about that, and that they will be used effectively to deter foreign interference.
And I understand that, but it's not a Chinese-Canadian registry. It's a foreign agent registry, right? Because we've talked about Iran, we've talked about Russia, we've talked about India as also being countries that potentially meddle in elections in some form or another. And we've heard from a lot of prominent activists in the Chinese-Canadian community, such as Sherry Wong and Fenella Sung, who say that it's not anti-Asian racism to do these things and to have an inquiry, because it needs to shine a light and expose the bad actors and vindicate the people who are good, honest Canadians. So I don't want to say, are you over worried about racism? Because obviously it has to be a consideration, but how do you respond to these?
I mean, I do think that there is an aspect of that for sure, right? Like, I think most of it also comes down to, you know, there's like allegedly like some of their constituents are like under fire for this as well too, right? like we talked about last time, right? But it's there's just opening an inquiry, man. I'm getting tired.
Pushbacks that stop using that as an excuse for slow action is what they're essentially saying.
I think it's very difficult to be overly concerned about racism given the trends that we have seen in the last couple of years, and the pandemic has done nothing but exacerbate it. I also think it's very important that we are inclusive in our discussions about how we create these new powers, because we want to be sure that they are carefully calibrated, that they respect the Charter, and that they do the job that they are intended to do. And in this particular instance, the goal of this conversation is to make sure that we are transparent about legitimate foreign activity, that we deter and discourage activity that goes beyond legitimate diplomacy, and that we engage all Canadians in a thoughtful way. And this is not a partisan issue. It is a Canadian issue. We need to be working across partisan lines to make sure that we get this right.
But speed also matters here, right? We could have an election. The longer this goes on, the more these foreign activities, whether it's Beijing or whoever, can continue without this extra legal tool of a foreign agent registry to curb their behavior and limit them. So what is the timeline? Will we have it by this fall, do you think?
Well, that's why we said today we launched it. We would conclude the consultations by May 9th, and shortly thereafter, we will look forward to taking the next steps that will inform the creation of the Foreign Transparency Registry. But I don't want to leave your viewers with the impression that we're not otherwise acting. We are vigilant 24/7 around the clock. You've heard that the RCMP have taken decisive action in shutting down some of these so-called police stations. You've heard that we're going to also appoint a special rapporteur to work with the NCCOP and NCIRA, who have been charged with the responsibility of looking further into how we can combat against foreign interference. This is a government that is fully seized with the concerns of Canadians around foreign interference. We'll take whatever steps are necessary to protect our institutions and them.
But there's a bill in the Senate that already outlines a plan for a foreign agent registry that you've said, I think in the past, has some merit. This was Kenny Chu's original piece of legislation that he was targeted for, that Leo Housakos has picked up. I mean, could you just adopt that? I mean, Australia has a regime. The Americans have had one since the 30s. So, I mean,
Unsurprising.
I understand the need to consult and to calibrate, but there's a need to deliver.
Well, and that's precisely what we are going to do through the launch of this consultation. I will add that I have consulted with my parliamentary colleagues in the Senate around the existing private members bill. I think that there is common ground in the objective, but it is not the only legal instrument that will allow us to achieve that goal. And I think more importantly, we need to make sure that we get out into the community, that we listen to various stakeholders and partners and experts as to how we can get the balance right between creating this new instrument, but doing so in a way that is inclusive and that is respectful of the principles around national security laws, which of course and the Charter, which of course are very much a touchstone of the way in which this government does this work.
Right, but I guess what I'm trying to nail down is, will this be something that is absolutely done in 2023? Will this be done before, say, the fall session of Parliament? Is this this year this comes into force?
I think you can be confident that we take
No,
this work
I don't
very
think it will.
seriously and that there is a sense of urgency to have this conversation.
If he's dodging the question this much, I don't think it will. Right.
Concluded by May 9th, and then to look forward to the next practical steps with alacrity so that we can create this instrument. That is the goal of this government, and it is consistent with our track record of always being vigilant and proactive when it comes to tackling the challenges around foreign interference. I think we're at a very sensitive juncture in our democracy. We're not the only one. We work closely with our G7 and our Five Eyes partners to do this work. We created a rapid response mechanism to tackle disinformation. I'm in contact with my counterparts all of the time. We're fully seized with it, and we'll continue to put in place the tools that are necessary to protect our economy, our academic research sector, our communities, so that we can protect all of our institutions.
So the next big step is the appointment of the special rapporteur. I mean, the last time we spoke, you said it would be within weeks.
Just a few days ago.
I know, I understand. We've spoken quite a bit lately.
It hasn't been that long.
But any more clarity on that, and when consultations will start with the opposition leaders as a final point?
Well, as quickly as possible on all fronts. And look, I sincerely hope that we stop seeing Pierre Poilievre bend over backwards to make this a partisan issue. It's been deeply regrettable to see the way in which he and his members of his party have attempted to smear the reputation of people like Morris Rosenberg, who've served Liberal and Conservative governments in the past. It was profoundly disappointing and I think absolutely unacceptable that one member of his caucus attempted to undermine the important work of my colleague, Minister Joly, with a misogynistic smear earlier this week. That's wrong. There should be an apology. We should get past the partisanship.
I don't think you'll get it.
Advance any cause. In fact, just undermines.
To be
us.
honest.
It plays right into hostile activities, and we need to be united in fighting against foreign interference.
Okay, so given that partisanship, do you think you can get agreement from the Conservatives on the special rapporteur? It seems to me that's not going to be possible.
We're going to do everything that we can to do that. I think that the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians is proof that when we put our collective heads together and try to work together, that we can reach across partisan lines to come up with good recommendations. We're acting on some of those recommendations, but we've got to put the bickering aside, make sure that we focus on protecting our institutions. That's my job as Minister of Public Safety. That's our focus as our government.
Okay, Marco Medicino, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see what CSIS is saying.
Turning now to yet another report of foreign meddling in Canada. According to the Globe and Mail, Canada's spy agency says Beijing allegedly interfered in Vancouver's municipal politics. Citing a January 22 CSIS memo, the report says, 2022, the report says China's then Consul General Tong Xiaoling sought to cultivate pro-Beijing politicians ahead of the municipal election in October of last year. This is the same Consul General who allegedly boasted about how she helped defeat two Conservative MPs in the 2021 federal election. The incumbent mayor, Kennedy Stewart, ultimately lost that municipal election, and in the lead-up to it, Stewart says he was briefed by the spy agency about the risk of potential foreign interference. Kennedy Stewart joins me now. Mr. Stewart, thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, thanks for having me. And first, let me express my condolences to the families of the two officers. That's just horrible news for anybody to hear.
Yes, sir. That's kind of you to do that. On the story in the Globe today about the alleged interference, you told the Globe you believe you were a target of Beijing-backed meddling. Why do you believe you were targeted?
Well, back in May, CSIS scheduled a meeting with me, and I had lots of meetings, but never one with CSIS. And they spent 2 hours, one of the high-ranking CSIS official and a specialist from their China desk briefing me and my chief of staff about, what foreign interference is, the kind of basic stuff, but then asking a ton of questions about what we were noticing. And when I asked them about why they were briefing me, they said, well, we've been sending reports up the chain and nobody's paying any attention. So they thought somebody should know. So that's why they came and said it to me. And then I said, well, what do you want me to do about it? And being CSIS, they don't really answer questions, so that was the extent of it. It was a long briefing, and there have been follow-up meetings, but it wasn't until I talked with the Globe and Mail editorial staff and reporters that I now understand at least why CSIS was concerned. But that's post-election now, so that's the way it goes.
Sending reports up the chain, but nobody paying attention. That's exactly what they said to you. Did they give you a sense of where the chain was, whether this was the CSIS chain or the political chain? Do you have any idea what they meant by that?
I don't. I mean, it was highly unusual, though. I mean, like, I'm a mayor of a city. Why is CSIS briefing me? And that's for them, to answer. For me, I was pretty trounced in the election. Like, I lost by 37,000 votes, which is a big margin out here. So I don't think foreign interference caused my loss. But as I'm a professor of political science here at the School of Public Policy at SFU, and I'd be deeply concerned about a very aggressive interference at any level of elections. Whether it's federal, where I also sat for 2 terms in the House of Commons, or here at the city, and this needs to get looked into. And I'm glad the Governor General David Johnson's coming in to start doing that.
Okay, CSIS asked you if you were noticing anything. Did you see anything? What did things look like on the ground for you that might suggest there was some sort of foreign interference in the municipal campaign?
Well, again, as mayor in election, you are kind of going to event to event. You're not involved in the day-to-day booking who goes where. But you always have whisperings here about busloads of folks going here and there, and that's very common. Any official would hear that. So I didn't raise it before because I didn't think there was any evidence of it. But what the Globe and Mail told me is that they have recordings. CSIS has recordings of conversations between.
I mean, like, this is just getting ridiculous, right? Like, if there's so much alleged, Chinese interference in the elections, we should just be looking into it. Like, there's no reason why we shouldn't be at this point, right?
The consul general, the Chinese consul general here, and folks on the ground. And then so they read me of what they had, these transcripts of these recordings. And that's, I was off the record until that point, but I thought I would add my voice to calling for an inquiry or extra work into this because, like, who has the tools other than the federal government to investigate this?
So the Globe and Mail has filled you in on a lot of this. What exactly did CSIS tell you in this briefing? I know they told you to be on the lookout for it and they had concerns about it, but did they give you any specifics as to what was actually happening and what was going on? What can you tell us?
Well, they were telling me that the consul. I mean, it's no secret that the consul general didn't like me, because we initially were friendly, and then I took a very strong stance on Taiwan. I had a new program where I was going to have Kaohsiung be a friendship city with the city, and the consul general publicly denounced this many times. And so I was picking up from folks on the ground saying that they are actively out there working against me in the election. I don't really know what that means. I don't have any way of surveilling anything. I don't, the Vancouver Police Department can't really investigate its own municipality. So I have really nowhere to go to look into any of this stuff. So I just proceeded with my election as I would. And now back here at the university. But now as a deeply concerned Canadian saying, hey, there's enough smoke here that we should be looking into this. And I'm glad David Johnson has been charged with that.
So did CSIS tell you specifically that it was Beijing that was actively working to defeat you, or was it Beijing looking to elect a Chinese-friendly candidate or a China-friendly candidate? Can you tell us any specifics of what they told you the intention of all of this was?
You know, the suggestion was they wanted somebody else's mayor. That they were deeply unhappy with my. I had cut off all communications with the consul general after they threatened to arrest my friend Michael Chong and Jenny Kwan, who are noted parliamentarians. And I just said, look, my schedule is full. I don't need to talk to the Chinese consul general anymore. I'm a friend of Taiwan. And I kind of left it at that. I mean, at that.
That's probably why, that happened, honestly. Because, when you're not talking to the Chinese Consul General, yeah, it's gonna be a little bit of a fun time for you.
Like, I have a lot of my desk as a mayor, and I kind of left it to I knew, but I told CSIS this will come out in my calendar, it will be public, and they were fine with that. In fact, they preferred that, and I said, well, what do I tell people when they ask me why were you meeting with CSIS? And they just left that up to me. So I'm just telling you what I've told other media sources, that they were concerned, nobody was paying attention. That's why they were briefing me, and then that was it.
I wonder if they gave you any more specifics on that point of that nobody was paying attention. They're running it up the chain, and they're getting frustrated with this. Because this, that has been the theory that is the motivation behind a lot of the leaks that we're seeing and the people's decision to speak and share information with the Globe and Mail and Global News and others. I mean, did you get your impression in the conversation they were fed up with a lack of political action, or what impression did they leave you with on that?
It was I asked them, I said, this is a fairly unusual step, and they're like, yes, it is. That to give you a sense of the conversation and like, why are you doing this? We think people should know and it was two people. Like, it wasn't like one person that was a disgruntled employee or something. And there have been follow-up meetings, and I know there were briefings with other people. What I'd be more concerned about, though, is that what I was told by the Globe and Mail editorial staff is they actually have recordings of people talking to the consul general about this, and they had access to transcribe recordings of whether they're wiretaps or whatever. I would think this is something that if I was in CSIS or in the cabinet, this needs to be looked at. And municipalities are so vulnerable to election interference. You have a big election coming up in Toronto. What's going on there? Who's looking at how these elections are being conducted? What information, if any, is available? Maybe there's nothing, but we should know that.
We have a special rapporteur now. David Johnson has been appointed to this, and you think that is a good choice based on the comments you've made earlier in this conversation. But his mandate is, as it is right now, likely limited to just the last two federal elections. There's no direction there necessary to look into municipal elections, provincial elections. Do you think the rapporteur's mandate needs to be broadened? Do you think we need a public inquiry into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of heading in that direction. Like, we either care about our democracy or we don't, right? Like, if this was the headline of the New York Times and they said that there was good evidence, including transcripts saying that there had been interference in the New York City election, like the FBI and all those folks would be all over this, but we seem kind of stuck on, oh, is this real or not? And should we investigate local elections? Absolutely. Like, all parts of our democracy the world is turning here. Like, it's not the 90s where democracies are expanding. We're shrinking across the world. And there's folks that are aggressive with us that have not been aggressive in the past. And they're very baldly trying to influence our politics here, influence our business, and kidnap our citizens, like the two Michaels. Like, come on.
I mean, to be fair though, the two Michaels were allegedly spies. So, I'm sorry, but if you're spies and you get caught, well, just did your job really badly. And like the thing is that the thing is that it's not like we haven't like interfered with like Chinese politics or businesses or whatever. Like we have 100% have done that. Like at the very least like assisted, right? So we're not guilt free about this. Like it's okay when we do it, but when it happens to us, it's automatically bad. Like no one should be doing that either way, right?
Let's get to this, and why would we limit it to the federal level? And I think the Governor General would have the he's recommending back to the cabinet at least what should be done, and I would hope that David Johnson would include nominations for parties as well as elections in at least the big cities.
Just one last question. You were told by the Globe that there are recordings and transcripts of conversations between the Consul General and operatives on the ground who would be tasked with doing whatever in the elections. This is Tong.
Oh no, with elected officials.
With elected officials.
Yeah.
At the municipal level, provincial level.
Yeah. Municipal level.
At the municipal level. Okay.
Seems like he's trying to change stuff a little bit, or change the story a little bit.
8 months after a lot of this stuff allegedly happened, was not expelled by the Canadian government, and there are no active police investigations in any of this, as far as we know.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she's going back to China to enjoy a great promotion because, I mean, I was at many functions where she came into the functions and berated the Canadian government in front of large audiences. Specifically the Prime Minister denouncing his actions, especially during the Huawei tension stuff. Like, this person has been very active.
I mean, to be fair, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Prime Minister, if I remember correctly, I think the Prime Minister handled that really fucking terribly, though, right? And like, he got a lot of criticism for it in general. So like, I don't really think that's enough to go off of, right?
During those talks, right? so like it's almost like China realizes that nobody here in Canada cares. They can come in and do whatever they want, and we're just turning a blind eye to this, which is really worrying. Like, do we care about our democracy or don't we? And I can tell you, in the UK or Australia or the US, this would have serious red flags. But we seem to be naive, I think, in terms of, and maybe there's nothing here, but we need to establish that, and we haven't.
All right. Well, Kennedy Stewart, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your time.
When he was cleared in the court of law, Major General Danny Fortin made it clear he would also seek vindication in the court of public opinion.
From the start, senior military leaders and political decision makers presumed and acted as if I was guilty.
Now he's launched yet another legal fight, a $6 million lawsuit against the Prime Minister, former Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan, Canada's top military commander, General Wayne Eyre, and 24 other civil servants and military members, along with the government itself.
So, for those who don't know, allegedly he was abusing his power in the military to commit like a bunch of like sexual acts and shit. So that's what's going on here. It was when all like the sexual like allegation stuff came out. I believe it was last year, the year before. So we're starting to slowly see that stuff trickled out. So
responsible, each in their own way.
The lawsuit alleges defamation, conspiracy, and a negligent military investigation. Carried out under rushed, politically sensitive circumstances, the die was cast before the investigation was fully and competently completed, the lawsuit says.
The investigation that was undertaken was completely inadequate and never should have resulted in any kind of referral at all.
He argues there's been serious harm to Fortin. The lawsuit points to comments the then Minister of Defense made, confirming the investigation and saying, "I am committed to working to build a true culture of inclusion where everyone is treated with dignity and respect."
The innuendo was that he was somehow guilty of some allegation of impropriety, which he has denied.
Experts say this lawsuit doesn't come as a surprise.
This has been a trend that's happening in the U.S. where individuals who've been accused of sexual assault after they have been found not guilty are countersuing victims or countersuing the institution.
In Fortin's case, others say it could hurt his chance of getting back to work.
It is complicated to have someone reinstated in their position or in their leadership track when they're suing their superiors, which creates a problem within the chain of command.
So, Ashley, what's Fortin's status now in the military?
Well, Adrian Fortin has said that he's been at home getting paid since he was removed from his post in 2021 amid the investigation. He now has a job, but this lawsuit says that he still hasn't been assigned any work. And the suit alleges that his reputation has been so tarnished that even the military will not accept his return. Now, none of these allegations have been proven in court. And as for the military, the Defense Department tonight is reviewing the statement of claim and said it will not be commenting at this time.
All right, Ashley Burke in Ottawa, thank you.
All right, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the lawsuit, to be honest. So, so for those who don't know, grocery store CEOs like Galen Weston was asked by the committee on why his profit margins were so high when Canadian citizens are struggling so much to like get groceries. And it essentially led to nowhere, right? We got nowhere with it. Because for one, he kept avoiding he kept avoiding the questions and whatever, putting the blame on suppliers, being like, oh, their supply costs are too high, despite the fact that, you know, the price gouging that is happening with the grocery stores is like 10.4 to 11%, and the grocery store, the grocery stores made 10.4 to 11% in profits. So there's that. And, you know, there wasn't really any, there wasn't really anything that came out of it. Like, I think we need to be holding these psychos accountable, so.
So, there's a lot of hate towards major grocery store chains lately. Part of it has to do with sky-high prices.
Everything's gone up.
We're definitely eating less meat.
Going to the store and buying a couple items, it feels like I'm spending $50 for a handful of items.
The other part of it is with all the
because you pretty much are.
Chains are making.
Some reaction this week to Canada's largest food retailer announcing their profits were up again.
Corporate grocery store profits are up, but workers aren't getting paid more.
How's business at Loblaw? Pretty brisk.
Which all just kind of makes us feel bad, right? Like we're losing, we're struggling, while the big grocers are winning and laughing all the way.
That's because they are.
Now, there are three big companies that control most of the grocery store market share in Canada. There's Loblaw Companies, which owns a whole bunch of other chains like No Frills.
Yeah, so this is all of their, I believe this is all of their brands that they own, right? And for those who remember, Galen Weston said that he was only going to be putting a price freeze on no-name products. But he still had, what, another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 brands that, you know, he didn't freeze, right? It was just no-name.
And Provigo. Metro has its own stable supermarkets, and Empire, which owns Sobeys, Safeway, IGA, and a few others. the CEOs of those three companies have been formally summoned to a parliamentary inquiry. Now, a formal summons means they have to go, or else they might be breaking the law. And the inquiry is basically, among other things, trying to figure out if we're getting gouged at the grocery store. And that
I mean, the thing is that we knew for a fact that they were going to lie either way about like, oh no, we're not gouging Canadian consumers at the grocery store, and try and push blame somewhere down the chain, whether it be, well, I guess it would just be pushing blame vertically down the chain, right? Being like, oh yeah, no, imports are high, or or suppliers are asking for too much, or whatever the fuck.
I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say,
What?
I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has
What
value.
is this?
Okay, so first thing, let's all calm down, because we're going to start down a path, but it's not going where you might think it's going. So the latest numbers from StatsCan show us that inflation right now is at like 5 or 6%, but food prices year over year from last January to this January have gone up more than 10%. And my producer, Drew, bought a couple of bags of groceries to help us make this point, because what I did was I went through all of the data from more than like 100 different common sort of grocery store items, everything from, bacon, canned tomatoes, celery, broccoli, you name it. And what I did was I looked at what they cost on average in January of 2022 compared to January 2023. These are the most recent numbers we have.
The main problem, though, is that if he includes the no-name products, it could potentially skew his findings, right? Because the no-name products were only, or had a price freeze until the end of January. I think if he was to look at, say, February's numbers, for example, he might potentially get a different number, or different things, right?
I flagged those foods that had gone up the most, and then Drew went on a...
Meats are going to be very expensive, and fruits and vegetables as well. And I think things like some grains and, oh, dairy for sure. Dairy went up for sure. And then maybe snack foods as well.
shopping trip to a major grocery store chain.
I swear if the entire thing that, or like at the end, he's just going to be like, oh, just budget better, I'm going to lose my shit, man.
He cross-checked my picks against the actual prices that we're paying today in March, and he brought back some of those foods that have gone up the most.
Cabbage?
Now, two of the biggest increases on average across the country were margarine and vegetable oil. So a 907-gram tub of margarine, January a year ago, used to cost on average $5.15. January this year...
For how much? 850 grams? That seems a little bit expensive. Even like for 2022 standards, right?
Jumped to $7.15. So that's a 39% increase. And where we bought it yesterday, here in Toronto, it cost us $9.29.
Damn, bro.
80% increase.
So it's getting even worse.
32% year over year, nationwide, from $8.62 to $11.38. We paid
What?
$12.79.
Wait, what?
50% increase.
Jesus.
Chicken thighs. Have you noticed chicken getting more expensive lately? I know I buy more pork these days than anything else. This used to cost $10.61 per kilogram. This most recent January, it was closer to $12.10 per kilogram, and we picked up this package for almost $20 a kilogram.
Wait, really?
Double what the average Canadian would have.
Damn, bro.
A year ago. Sugar, up 23%. Flour, up 20%. Cereal, on average, up 16% year over year. And you can confirm all these national averages yourself too, by the way. Statistics Canada, they make all of this pricing data publicly available. And let me just say, so where we got just absolutely owned at the store, canned tomatoes and canned soup, something you might eat on a budget, right? It used to be that you could get a can of tomatoes like this for
Is it going to be like $5?
A year later, the average price went up to $1.76, which is a 22% increase nationwide. Like a bunch of suckers, we bought this for $3.49.
Damn, bro.
142% increase over last January's prices.
That's
Same
crazy.
canned soup used to be $1.18, then it became $1.38 a year later. This was $2.99 yesterday, which means this got jacked up 153%.
Jesus.
Now, pardon me while I go throw up, because these are all really good examples of inflation. But we haven't even
Inflation? That seems more like price gouging to me if it's going up over 100%. Just saying. Because if inflation's only like 5 or 6 percent, and you know, things are going up by quite a large margin there, I don't think that's due to inflation.
About shrinkflation, which is when prices don't necessarily go up, but you get less product. Like when Pearl Milling Company started selling maple syrup in a taller bottle. So it looks bigger, that's on the left.
Just have to read it.
And actually holds 5% less maple syrup.
I mean, yeah, you know, shrinkflation, price gouging, you know, all that stuff. Like, it all culminates to, you know, people getting less and less for more money, right?
And they increase the price. Or how about this? Barilla spaghetti. Same size box, but the top one has 34 grams less product. And over the next 7 months after the new smaller size was introduced, the price steadily went up as well. But
It's kind of like these grocery chain CEOs are trying to make as much money as possible with you know, selling as little product as they can get away with. Like the thing is that I honestly don't see this trend like stopping anytime soon unless we actually fucking do something about it. Like, the government needs to step in and actually do something about this. Like, this is getting ridiculous, right?
Inflation and shrinkflation for a moment. Have you ever heard of shelfflation? According to one expert we spoke to, it's this idea that sometimes those fruits and veggies that you buy, they don't last as long before they go bad. Like,
so, here's something funny about this, right? You know, in the fresh produce aisle, right? Where you have those like refrigerated areas where you spray water on, those actually last a lot less than, you know, say like your apples that are sitting out not in the refrigerated area, excuse me, and getting water spritzed onto it, right? It's it just leads to more fucking food waste, first of all, and like most of the stuff that's there doesn't even need that water, like, or needs to be refrigerated.
The carrots that we bought, you know, the broccoli that we bought, oh, these carrots look a little sad, right? So if they're less and less fresh over time, you might pay the same price or maybe even slightly less, but it goes bad more quickly, which may mean you'll have to buy more sooner, increasing the amount of money per year that you spend on that thing. But even beyond inflation, shrinkflation, and shelfflation is the most sinister inflation of all, and the one that really pisses people off, greedflation.
New figures show food prices up more than 11% over last year, the biggest jump since 1981, all while supermarket chains record sky-high profits.
Major grocery chains are being accused of price gouging and so-called greedflation.
Loblaw, along with competitors Empire and Metro, have come under scrutiny lately. All three companies insist they're not taking advantage of inflation to pad profits.
They literally are. They say that, but they literally are. Right?
3 reports from the big three: Loblaw, Metro, and Empire. We'll start with Empire. So if I look at its quarterly results here, you can see that just in its food retailing business, because Empire does other things besides food, we can see here $158 million in profit. That's just for the quarter, and it's almost $700 million for the year if you add it to the 3 previous quarters. Metro, looking at their quarterly numbers. So we can see here $168.7 million in profit. That's from Q4 last year. $849.5 million for the entire fiscal year. And then there's Loblaw. This is the biggest fish of them all. $529 million.
Jesus, bro.
Profit. That was just in the last quarter.
Jesus.
Almost $2 billion in total profits for 2022. What can I say? It was a good year. And it gets even better if you're a shareholder, like an executive of the company or an investor, because Loblaw, for example, spent $1.3 billion last year in stock buybacks. If you don't know what that is, that's when a company spends a bunch of money to buy back shares.
And this is exactly why we should not be fucking bailing out companies or giving them money, right? Because time and time again, whenever we give companies free money or help bail them out or whatever the fuck, they end up just spending all that fucking money on on stock buybacks. Like, they always do it, right?
Shares that are floating around out there, removing them from circulation, which makes the remaining shares worth more. Now, it doesn't make the company worth any more.
It just raises the prices, or just makes the shareholders and executives even more money than what they already have.
It doesn't make it any more efficient or lower prices or anything like that. But if you're someone who owns a big stake in the company, like the CEO, seeing the share price increase means you just got a lot richer. And it's not just Loblaw that does this. Corporations do this all the time. Metro has plans to buy.
Yeah, like it's not even limited to grocery chains. It's literally every single corporation that does this, right?
Back $500 million worth of shares this year.
So I try not to complain, but this is ridiculous.
I was having trouble staying on my diet till I saw the price of food.
But here's where things get a little murky, because up until this point, everything does kind of fall very neatly into our basket of rage, doesn't it?
I want you to get up right now.
It definitely does.
The window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this
I don't
anymore."
even know what this is from.
High prices at a time when we're still reeling from the pandemic, and big grocery chains making money hand over fist. But let's try to understand the other side of the coin. And we'll use Loblaws as an example here, since they're the biggest one. So the company says its gross profit margin is actually down since 2021.
That's a lie.
Yes, it made a ton of money last year, but
That's literally a lie. They're like fucking bragging about how much about their record-breaking profits. And that's what people are mad about, right? As well as like the insanely fucking high food prices, right?
it used to make so much more before inflation went crazy. They posted this on Twitter. It's easy to blame grocers for high grocery prices, but on a $100 grocery bill,
This is a lie.
they make less than $4 profit.
That's a lie.
And for years, the profit margins of the big grocery chains have tended towards those low single digits. So the way they see it is it really gouging if we're only making 4% profit. What we don't have is access to Loblaw's books. So we have no way of verifying this or knowing how prices are set in the first place. But on a recent earnings call, Loblaw's chief financial officer explained where the company is seeing growth. Q4 retail gross margin was 30.6%, down 30 basis points compared to last year. This was driven by a decrease in food retail margin that was partially offset by growth in higher margin drug retail front store categories. Translation, food profits were down, but profits at Shoppers Drug Mart, which Loblaw owns, went up. Apparently, people have been buying lots of cold medicine and cosmetics lately.
I wonder why. Or I wonder what, people were buying cold medicine for. I wonder.
Helps explain, he says, why overall Loblaw appears to be making so much money. He continues.
Appears they are making a shit ton of money. They're making money hand over fist and pushing the blame on on the suppliers, right? Which isn't true. It's just price gouging and price leadership, which we should make illegal.
Our Q4 results are further evidence that retail prices are not growing faster than costs, and the company is not taking advantage of inflation.
The lie, don't fall for it.
Profit. So, that's Loblaw's.
Every single private company is behest to making as much profit as possible, because that keeps shareholders happy and that keeps executives happy, right?
Point of view. Take it. And all three major chain CEOs are scheduled to testify tomorrow before a House committee looking into increasing food prices. Nisha Patel is a business reporter here at CBC, and she's joining us in our kitchen.
And I've watched them appear at the committee, and they either avoided questions or lied about them. So, yeah, there's that.
Nisha Patel, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks for being here.
You bet.
So you're going to be watching the hearing tomorrow, and so who are we expecting? Galen Weston, CEO of Loblaw, Michael Medline of Empire, and Eric Leflesh of Metro.
Yeah.
What are you expecting to see and hear?
There will be a lot of questions. Maybe they'll have some different ones this time, but really this is the first time we're seeing the CEOs answer questions on this topic. Some of them have been more vocal than others. Michael Medline has been out there pushing back against these accusations against the grocer. He's been out there saying, I don't want to apologize for our success.
Again, it was just them engaging in price leadership because, that's just what fucking companies do that are in the same area, right? Or the same, just in the same industry, right? Like, it happens literally everything. They can't sit in a fucking smoke-filled room and be like, hey, we're going to be increasing our prices. You guys should do that too.
Galen Weston, though, has not taken questions on this. We've been asking for an interview. He hasn't given us one. So it'll be really interesting to hear how he answers these, whether or not he has any kind of different approach to the technique that Loblaw has been taking so far.
Right. So let me ask you, though, is it going to be interesting? Because I haven't read a whole lot from people who think we're going to get a lot of answers.
It's rare, though, that this kind of standing committee on agriculture and agri-food gets this much attention.
Sure.
I think there will be a lot of attention on it. I think there could be some fireworks.
Which perhaps is the point of this in a way, right? To be seen to be asking the right kind of question.
Well, and the politicians who are looking at this know that this is something that Canadians are fired up about. So there may be an element of political theater here to be able to be seen asking these questions if they can't quite do anything about it.
You said at the beginning that
we'll
hear something different from
the politicians 100% can do shit about it. Say, I don't know, start a national grocery chain, hold those responsible, or, hold them responsible for price gouging Canadians. There's plenty more that they could do. Those are just some ideas that they could do and implement.
Companies this time. The companies did appear previously, like over December, right? Like the chief financial officers were before this committee.
Yeah, there's been 2 meetings so far where representatives of the companies have come up and said, okay, here's the things we're doing. The committee has asked them things like, were you colluding during the price freeze? The answer was no. What is happening with your profit margins? And they're like, we are not making money off of this. We are
okay.
kind of doing what we can. They've said that they've been pushing back against the suppliers. But really, there have been a lot of questions about how these companies are making their profit. One of the things that is difficult about this is that when you have a company, their financial statements can be quite opaque. So Loblaw, for example, can say, we're making money because we're selling more lipstick for food. But if you don't break down those numbers, it is very difficult to prove that.
And we're not necessarily going to be able to get that kind of a detailed break-in at the committee tomorrow?
The lawmakers can ask for that, but whether or not the company chooses to provide that is up to them, right? They do have a choice. They're a public company. What you need to see from the grocers is how much they're paying to suppliers,
right,
and then the markup on the shelf.
Sure.
And that difference could really show you whether they are profiting in excess. The problem is that without kind of inside information, you can't really get that. So if there's any industry whistleblowers out there who want to slide into our DMs, they can just do that.
So given what you just said there about how it may be exceedingly difficult for us or anyone to be able to gauge whether indeed these grocery companies are profiteering in an excessive way, given we don't have access to those numbers. I mean, after we finish watching the hearing, are we going to sort of know whether or not this collective outrage that we feel is justified? Like are we going to get any closure?
It's a tough one.
No.
I'm not sure it'll be very satisfying, right? It may be satisfying for some people to see these CEOs taking questions. They've sent their top generals so far, but they are the chiefs of the companies. The buck stops with them. So maybe some people will feel satisfied, but I think it really depends on their posturing, right? If they are apologetic in any way, if they offer any kind of apology, that might sort of ease the public pressure on them a little bit. But this is something that people are fired up about. We go to the grocery store every week, and every week you are seeing these prices rise. So until profits stall or until food inflation eases, I think it is just going to be this debate that goes on until we see one of those couple of things happening.
Maybe we'll have you on the program. Nisha Patel, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, which is it's just insane. So move on to discussing the horrific shit that's going on with the LGBTQ community in America. So first of all, Florida is set to dramatically expand its Don't Say Gay laws, which, it was already fucking disgusting as is. Republican lawmakers in Florida appear likely to expand provisions in their Parental Rights and Education Act, or the so-called Don't Say Gay bill, or gay law, with a host of new restrictions on what teachers can or cannot say in their classrooms about gender, sex, and sexual orientation. Bills currently being debated in the Florida State House would make it a statewide school policy to define sex as an immutable biological trait. I mean, okay, sure. Teachers would be banned from addressing students by pronouns that differ from those that they were assigned to at birth, which is ridiculous. Because, you know, literally everyone has fucking pronouns. He, him is is a fucking pronoun. She, her is a pronoun. Like, come on. Staff would also be unable to share their own preferred pronouns if they do not correspond to his or her sex. The bills would also heavily restrict in-school discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity until 9th grade, when most students are 14 or 15. The current Don't Say Gay law bans such discussions through 3rd grade. I mean, like, the thing... Okay, so then... you're not going to be talking about, you know, fucking sexual orientation, like, say, you know, the stereotypical wife and husband, then, because, you know, that's a sexual orientation. You know, gender identity is, like, what someone fucking identifies as. Like, it's not hard, you know. Like, gender's a fucking social construct anyways. And, like, most people's understanding about gender is very fucking rigid, so that doesn't really matter. It's just going to reinforce, like, the fucking normative position, and, you know, not say, like, hey, you know, there are different fucking people that exist, because, like, it's just so infuriating. Like, fuck, it's not even getting into, like, any of the other like 400 bills that was introduced. Experts time spoke to say the bill is likely to pass, which is unsurprising. Republican state governor Clay Yarborough, who introduced one of the bills, says the legislation gives parents control over when and if certain topics should be introduced to young children. But critics include the American Civil Liberty Union of Florida say the bills are part of a conceded effort to remove LGBTQ people from public life, which is true. I mean, it's not surprising. Ron DeSantis is essentially like a fucking fascist, so. If not, he is one. This bill would silence students from speaking about their LGBTQ plus family members, friends, neighbors, and icons. It would also bar LGBTQ students from talking about their own lives and would deny their very existence, says Kirk Bailey, political director of the ACLU of Florida. The existing Don't Say Gay law is already working to squelch conversation for LGBTQ students, as students and facility or faculty feel a climate fear, says Burnett Robinson, a sociology teacher and co-sponsor of his school's Gay Straight Alliance in Duden High School in the Tampa Bay area. Teachers feel like they are being watched closely, and LGBTQ students feel like they don't have the same protections they did before, he says. Students have a lot to say, but ironically, public school is not the place where we often talk about it because you're concerned that there will be a complaint, Robinson says. Many fear for the health and well-being of queer families and children if they feel that they are unwelcomed in schools. A survey conducted by Morning Consult in 2021 found that 85% of transgender and non-binary youth have seen their mental health decline amid debates around the anti-trans bills. I mean, the funny thing here is that, like, they don't give a shit, right? Like, they don't, like, people, like, these Republican fucking losers want, essentially want these fucking kids to, you know, unalive themselves. Like, it's fucking depressing, man. Don't Say Gay, which was enacted in March 2022, bans public schools from teaching about sexual orientation and gender in the classroom from kindergarten through grade 3 or in a way that is not age or developmentally appropriate for students, which is ironic considering how, if I'm not mistaken, your gender identity is like developed at like as early as 3, if I'm not mistaken. So it's fucking silly. The vague language many believed could be interpreted to mean that school lessons such as sexuality could be deemed inappropriate for older children. Critics feared that the law would prevent queer students and families from equal participation in the classroom. During a Senate hearing in February 2022, for instance, Republican Senator Travis Hudson said that a math problem that mentioned that a child has 2 moms or 2 dads was exactly the type of discussions the law would prevent. Like, who gives a shit about that, right? Like, only fucking idiots give a shit about that. Like, okay, there are fucking kids with 2 dads or 2 moms. Like, who cares? Schools are thus essentially barred from acknowledging the existence of anything outside of the heteronormative structure. The additional bills would make those measures stronger. Florida, which already allows students to opt out of sexual health lessons, would restrict discussions about sexual orientation and gender identity from pre-kindergarten to 8th grade, despite extensive research showing that access to sex education can help decrease teen pregnancy, which is true. The legislation would also make it public school district policy to define sex as a person's sex chromosomes, naturally occurring sex hormones, and internal and external genitalia presented at birth. A recently added amendment to HB 1223 makes an exception for people who are born intersex. Yeah, the funny thing is that like the intersex people are like going to be targeted for this as well. And like, this is just fucking silly, right? House Bill 1069, which was also introduced as an accompanying bill to HB 1224, to require teachers to teach students in the 6th grade, in grades 6 through 12, that biological males impregnate biological females by fertilizing a female egg with male sperm, that the female then castrates the offspring, and that these reproductive roles are binary, stable, and unchangeable. Yeah, okay, sure. like all you need to do is just be like, yeah, tell that to fucking nature. Yeah, Nemo would have fucked his dad and became a dad. So there's that. All materials used to teach reproductive health would need to be approved by the Florida Department of Education, which has worked to heavily restrict the kinds of text books that are allowed in the classroom, and also ban the teaching of new AP African American student studies class. Yeah, that's not surprising. District school boards would be required to create a form where anyone who lives in the district could submit complaints and about instructional materials being used. Just ridiculous, because the fucking hogs are gonna be abusing that like all fucking hell. This legislation is part of the ongoing culture war plagued in the state, where Florida Governor Ron DeSantis says woke goes to die. DeSantis has previously pushed back against introducing courses like AP African American study classes or class, which was stripped down by a college board after Florida governor voiced concerns about introduction or indoctrination. Yeah, which is really funny considering that, religion does, which religion is literally fucking indoctrination. Similar to arguments in favor of Parental Rights and Education Act, preempts of these bills contained that the current legislation is being debated is all about parental rights and protecting kids from ideologies that families may disagree with. Who fucking cares? Right? Like, there's these people that are just fucking whining about, like, what pronouns someone uses, or just fucking snowflakes. Right? Like, I've never seen a more fucking snowflake group of people than fucking conservatives. Like, they cry about literally every little thing, and it's so goddamn annoying. There is no doubt that one family is completely different than another family. Christian Zolger, chairman of the Florida GLP, tells Time. But the most appropriate way to handle this is to allow parents and families to introduce these concepts and have these discussions with their family when they think it's appropriate. Okay, so like, unless you're like a fucking liberal and living in Florida, so like never, right? Other proponents claim they are pushing for the advancement of these bills to better address Florida's poor education statistics. The Sunshine State was ranked as the state with the worst learning rate across the nation, as students learn 12% less each grade than the national standard. They maintain that gender issues and social justice have gotten into the way of teachers doing their jobs effectively in the classroom. Yeah, okay, sure. Or, it could be that, teachers are not being paid enough, the underdeveloped fucking schools that are in the public system, and like a lot of the dog shit ways that, America runs fucking education. And like it doesn't also help that like a lot of the fucking public schools are also like underfunded as well. And like, you know, charter schools are a fucking thing that take a lot of the fucking money from the public sector. Keith Flau, co-founder of Florida Citizens Alliance, an organization that is lobbying in favor of these bills, unsurprising, says that he believes the state needs to focus more on improving their education tactics instead of gender, sex, and sexuality. The end objective, in my view, is hopefully to get the school districts out of the whole social justice arena and back into teaching academics, he said. Like, here's the thing, right? Is that, like, a lot of this shit, like, isn't even discussed within these fucking schools, right? Like, gender studies is a fucking college major, or it's a college course, right? And, like, the thing is like, you're gonna have people are gonna be having, like, when it comes to, like, kids, right? Like, they understand, like, you know, what they fucking feel like, as well as, you know, like they get that, you know, some people have two moms or two dads, right? It's so fucking stupid. Ziegler adds that he hopes schools will focus on education rather than being indoctrinated. He believes a teacher who uses preferred pronouns that differ from what they were assigned to at birth are pushing an agenda that highlights gender and sex alternative identities. The funny thing about this is, like, whenever, you know, sexual orientation, gender, and sex come up, like, this happens with trans people too, is that, you know, people automatically think that these people are, like, having butt sex or whatever the fuck, right? Like, why the fuck does your mind automatically go there? Like, it's completely ridiculous. Like, no one's, like, a fucking, like, let's use a trans person as an example, right? A trans person is just, you know, gonna go to their preferred bathroom and, like, I don't know, take a shit. They're not gonna be fucking, like, raping someone in there. Like, come on, man. It was the exact same thing with, like, the gay panic. Like, you know, gay guy wants to go to the fucking bathroom, and then, like, and then, like, you think that he's gonna be having fucking gay butt sex with someone in there. Like, it's so fucking stupid, man. Bailey of the ACLU Florida says these bills are part of a larger concerning pattern of legislation that uses the mere existence of LGBTQ plus teens and adults to chill the First Amendment right to free speech and free expression in the classroom. Brennan Wolf expresses security for LGBTQ rights groups. Equality Florida says Republican leaders, including DeSantis, are politicizing these issues to manufacture hysteria and moral panic. Yeah, he's right. This legislation adds to approximately 300 anti-LGBTQ bills that have been already introduced at the state level across the U.S., according to GLAAD. Yeah, like, I know Tennessee has been popping off lately with theirs. That's, like, not even getting into a lot of the fucking shit that they're pushing with, like, abortion stuff, right? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the states is, like, wanting to, like, forcibly remove, like, trans kids who have got like reaffirming care and force them back to get like to like the gender that they were already were, what the fuck, or like the sex that they already were, which is fucking like disgusting, right? Like it's heartbreaking to see, you know, those people go like even have like the thought of that. Like it's just I can't like express the amount of anger that I feel towards that, but like I can't express the amount of, I imagine, anger, fear, and whatever else like they're going through, right? Like it's just insane. I think the hypocrisy is in on display when you see an unwillingness to give parents the rights to their children's respected in school, when those parents may dare to disagree with the right-wing politicians that are being bringing these policies forward. Wolf says, yeah. But yeah, and then like uh what I should probably mention was the fact that um the like I did mention the, you know, more ridiculous like abortion stuff, like say South Carolina for example, who like if you're getting like an abortion or whatever, like I think it's like your fucking fetus doesn't make it, you know, you get the death penalty or something like that, which is insane, right? Because like, you know, it's for to protect against abortion, the big scary abortion. But like, what happens if someone fucking miscarries, right? For example, like, you know, do they get the fucking chair too? Like, it's fucking wild. Like, America is becoming more and more of a fucking fascist state. Like, it was already fascist for a fairly long time, but like, they're just doing it out in the open, and like, you know, if you disagree with like whatever the fucking psychos who are running, you know, their fucking government, you know, well, I guess we're gonna send the fucking police in at you and beat the shit out of you. It's ridiculous. The advocates for and against these bills that time spoke to believe this legislation will pass, which I imagine it will. LGBTQ plus advocates especially fear that the bill would have adverse effects on LGBTQ plus family members and the more than 16,000 Florida youth that identify as transgender. The impact of the current eradication of the Don't Say Gay bill or gay law is already profound. Research by the William Institute of the UCLA School of Law found that more than half of all LGBTQ parents surveyed consider moving out of Florida because of this bill. About 88% of LGBTQ plus parents were very or somewhat worried about the effects or the effect Don't Say Gay would have on their family. Those surveyed who were particularly concerned about their kids would not be able to talk openly about their family, and that such legislation would encourage a hostile school climate that would negatively impact their children. Which, yeah, it would. It's driven teachers from the profession. It's led to books being banned, classroom topics being censored. It's led to parents wondering whether or not Florida schools are even worth sending their kids to anymore. And this 1223 would expand those provisions all the way to the 8th grade, Wolf adds. I mean, yeah, like, here's the funny thing. You know, this, like, just this alone reminds me a lot of 1940s Germany. You know, because they did a lot of fucking book burnings on books that they didn't agree with, and like heavily censor topics as well. Just to name a few things that Germany did in the 1940s. It's looking awfully similar, except instead of like fucking burning books, they're just banning them. But I imagine they're fucking incinerating them somewhere. In order for a bill to pass the Florida state legislature, the bill has to be passed through at least 2 committees before going through a border vote in their respective legislative chambers. Wolf notes that these all offer opportunities for amendments to be added to the bill. In the Florida State House Republicans would have an 84 to 35 majority with 1 vacancy. The state Senate, it's 28 to 12. However, one amendment would have offered parents the opportunity to ask a school to refer their child to their preferred pronouns, was already rejected on party lines. Surprising. One of the biggest concerns is that these bills would compound their problems. Transgender people, trans people have a suicide rate nearly 9 times that of the broader U.S. population. The attacks on their rights are harrowing. Send a message to those young people that they don't belong here, that there's something wrong with them, and that only deepens the mental health crisis they already have existing, Wolf says. I mean, yeah. It's ridiculous. And then, oh yeah, we are going to be talking about Tennessee Senate passes bill codifying discrimination against LGBTQ plus people into law. Today, the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer civil rights organization, condemns the Tennessee state for passing SB 1440, a bill that accepts to discriminate against LGBTQ plus Tennesseans by codifying sex as a person's immutable biological sex and determined by anatomy and genetics existing at time of birth and evidence that the person's biological sex. Yeah, so like Tennessee also essentially fucking passed their shit as well. Like the same shit. Like, it's ridiculous, right? And like with that, there is something that I think people should do for anyone that is watching. So since there's a lot of nonsense going on, there is a petition here that would allow LGBTQ plus people to seek asylum here in Canada, not just from like the US, but like other places. But like, it's mostly to address the deranged shit that's going on in America right now. So this petition is for the House of Commons. The world is becoming increasingly hostile to transgender and non-binary individuals. Transgender and non-binary people's rights to live as themselves are being restricted and removed in many places. This includes so-called Western democracies, which have historically been presumed safe. The United Kingdom is reversing their Equality Act to include trans people from to exclude, trans people from its protections. More than a dozen American states have enacted or are considering legislation eliminating or criminalizing gender-affirming care, and Canada has prided itself on being inclusive, tolerant, and welcoming society for everyone, regardless of gender identity or gender expression. So, yeah, go to, where was it? Rebrandly dash transgender asylum, or sorry, Rebrandly dash trans asylum to fill out this form or this petition. I've already signed it. Like, I'm sorry, but like, if people are fearing for their lives, and not feeling safe in their country of origin, they should be allowed to asylum seek here. Like, if we pride ourselves so much on being inclusive and tolerant, we should allow them to seek asylum here, whether they be from the UK, the US, wherever. And it's completely ridiculous, like, that they have to put up with it, right? And like, honestly, like, if they're wanting to seek asylum here, like, I welcome them with open arms. I already consider them fucking Canadians. They just need to get here. Like, there's no reason. So yeah, you'll have until May 2023 or May 26th, sorry. So I highly encourage those who have stuck around for this long or watching this now to, sign this petition. You live in Canada, and like help people who are facing threats from their elected officials and shit like that, because they're fucking trans or non-binary or gay or whatever the fuck. Like, it's ridiculous. It's not like we don't have the fucking space or the resources. It's just not located properly and used properly. But it's something that like, this is important to me, considering that I'm LGBTQ. I'm bi, right? So I don't want any of anyone else there to fucking face like anything to. But anyways, yeah, sign the petition. It's the very least you can do. So yeah, with that, we'll be doing some. We'll be doing a new game tomorrow. Not too sure what we're gonna be doing. Actually, he told me. I'm just an idiot. I don't remember what it was, but I guess you'll find out tomorrow. Till then, I hope everyone has a great day, morning, night, whatever it is for you. Till then.